So hello everyone, how are you all? I hope you are all fine. I think you missed me. If yes, comment down yes, and I really apologize. I haven't uploaded videos since 2.5 weeks, so now I'm back with a new video. So in this video, we are going to see what if Naruto mastered all 5 basic elements which Kekkei-Genkai would he possess. If you want the next part, let me know in the comment down below, and so yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video. Naruto Uzumaki was tired. It had taken him 3 hours to learn the Shadow Clone Jutsu, but despite his exhaustion he smiled, with that he could graduate and become a Genin. He looked around, Mizuki had not arrived yet and he had already accomplished his goal. He looked back at the scroll. He had focused on the first jutsu he had written on the scroll. Surely there were many others, perhaps more interesting or powerful than the Kage Bunshin was. With a sly smile, he walked over and unrolled the contents. Certainly the scroll was big and long, with many techniques on it, but there was none that caught her attention, or rather, they all seemed interesting to her, and she didn't know which one to choose. Suddenly, his eyes met a technique, Ito Tensei. She skimmed a little about what the jutsu did and how to do it. At last he had found the technique he wanted to try next. The paper said that a human sacrifice was necessary, since he didn't really understand what it meant and couldn't ask anyone, he decided to try the shadow clones. A DNA sample was also needed to summon the person you wanted, but since he didn't understand that part either and didn't have anyone in mind, she let it be. He made the seal of the cross, and 3 copies of him appeared in front of him, each one with a smile and full of emotion. Next he began to make the hand seals necessary to perform the technique. When he held the last seal, before hitting the ground, he thought about who he could resurrect. The stories that Iruka-sensei gave them in class came to her mind. Because most of them were boring, he didn't pay attention, but there were 4 names that he remembered perfectly. Hashirama and Tobirama Senju, Madara Uchiha and Minato Namikaze. Thinking about those 4, not realizing that he had only created 3 clones, although that wouldn't alter the outcome since you can't resurrect someone who was sealed, he hit the ground while saying the jutsu. In the place where his clones had been, 3 wooden coffins appeared, much to the boy's bewilderment. The covers fell and showed 3 of the people he had thought of. A smile spread across his face. She could barely contain her excitement. She had performed the jutsu right the first time. He was proud of himself. On the other hand, the 3 people summoned had different feelings. On the one hand, Madara was not at all happy that he was resurrected early, plus he was not his apprentice, but a boy he didn't know at all. Tobirama wasn't happy either. He never thought his technique would be used against him, and it baffled him that it was a child no less who had called him to the realm of the living. Hashirama, unlike the other 2, was happy and excited to return, especially because he could see his old friend. "Who are you, child? And how do you know my technique?" the white-haired man asked the blonde. "Tobi-kun, don't talk to the little one like that. You'll scare him," his older brother scolded him. "I also ask myself the same question," commented the last of the 3. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Nice to meet you," he greeted happily. He was ecstatic at his success. "Hello. I am Hashirama Senju. The serious man on my left is my little brother Tobirama, and the grumpy man on my right is Dara-chan," said the one in the middle. The Uchiha growled at his former friend's nickname. Although on the outside he looked very upset, on the inside, a part of him is happy to hear you call him that again. It's not like he was going to admit it out loud. Hashirama laughed at his old friend and rival's reaction. He regretted how things turned out in the end. Maybe this was the opportunity he had been asking for so much to fix things with the Sharingan user. Tobirama, for his part, ignored his brother and the Uchiha's interaction. His mind was on the boy in front of him. He didn't understand how Hiruzen could allow the boy to learn a technique as dangerous as Ito Tensei, and he wasn't going to be left wondering. "Tell me, child, how did you learn Ito Tensei?" he asked her. The blonde came out of his stupor at being in front of 3 legends and answered him. "Mizuki-sensei told me that I could become a Genin if I managed to steal the forbidden scroll and learn a jutsu. I found the Kage Bunshin and learned it, but since he hasn't arrived yet, I decided to learn another one just in case, and I came across this other technique." The Suiton user pondered his words. It was obvious in his head that this must be a trap. No one could expect an academy student to steal something from the Hokage's vault. This guy made it though, much to his dismay. The only probable solution to what was happening was that this Mizuki guy had tricked him into stealing the scroll, so it was clear that the man was a traitor and had no qualms about using a child for his purposes. The other 2 revived also came to the same conclusion as they heard the Uzumaki's response, which horrified Hashirama. He had created the village to protect children, and yet, this guy had used one for his ambitions. "Where is this Mizuki guy?" the older Senju asked angrily. The sight of the angry wood user was a very rare sight for anyone who knew him. The man had always been someone nice, too much so in his brother's opinion, so his current state did not match his usual self. "Don't know. She's supposed to be here soon, Naruto answered confused. Although he didn't know much about the first Hokage, even he found his mood change from happy to angry strange. Tobi-kun, Dara-chan, do you mind if I take charge of Naru-chan sensei? He questioned his companions. The white-haired man shook his head and the other shrugged. Neither of them would get involved in their battle. The blonde was confused. Not so much because the man wanted to talk or whatever with Mizuki, but the fact that he had given him a pet name. Except for 4 people, no one showed him affection and only AM called him Naru-chan. He was strange, though nice. Not even 2 minutes passed before the 3 revived shinobi sensed movement nearby, so they hid, much to the blue-eyed man's confusion. Naruto, a voice shouted. He looked ahead and could see an upset Chunin with a scar on his face. Hello Iruka-sensei, the Uzumaki greeted cheerfully. He was happy to see his older brother figure, although he did not understand the reason for his anger. The former Konoha ninjas did not explain to him what was happening. What the hell were you thinking when you stole the forbidden scroll? He asked angrily, confusing the boy even more. Mizuki-sensei told me that I could become a genin if I did it and learned a jutsu. Look, he said and joined her fingers in the shape of a cross. Instantly, 3 copies of himself smiled at the older shinobi. He believed that with it he would pass. Iruka was surprised that the blonde had been able to learn the shadow clone in a few hours, but he quickly woke up. It wasn't the time. Naruto, it is very wrong that you stole the scroll, and even more so to lie about the reason the man could not believe that his fellow Chunin had done that. But it's the truth, the blue-eyed man complained, not understanding why Iruka had called him a liar. At that moment, Mizuki appeared on one of the branches and began to speak. Although Hashirama wanted nothing more than to go and beat him up for using a child, he was also curious as to why he did it, as the shinobi next to the blonde asked him. After he told the whole story, his plan, and the fact that Naruto was a Jinchuriki, he threw his smoke shuriken at the shocked boy. It never harmed him or the other academy instructor because the wood user caught the projectile and threw it back at him. While the older Senju dealt with the traitor, Madara used his Sharingan to alter Iruka's memories with a Jinjutsu, as he wanted his existence and that of the Senju to be unknown to everyone, which is why he also altered Mizuki's memories once. His old rival finished him off. When Iruka woke up, he did so with false memories implanted in him by the former Uchiha patriarch, in which he and Mizuki fought, but it was Naruto himself who stopped the traitor with his shadow clone jutsu and left him in such a bad state. At this, he congratulated the boy and gave him his ninja band. The blonde, after talking with Hashirama and Tobirama, understood that being a Jinchuriki meant being the Bijuu's prison, not himself, so he managed to calm down and act normal when his brother figure finally woke up. Also, at their request, he did not tell anyone that he could use the Edo Tensei and had resurrected them, to which he initially complained, but then accepted it. He could understand his reasoning. Ninjas hide their true power from the enemy to have an advantage over them, and if it were known that they were alive and under their control, they would be the center of attention of several people who wanted that power for themselves. On the other hand, he would have personalized training by 3 of the strongest shinobi in history, which excited Naruto, although Madara was really not happy with it, which earned him several ridicules from the wood user. Given the technique, the blonde could restrain them by will, something he knew but wasn't going to use. He didn't like the idea of using people as puppets, much to the confusion of the 2 more stoic men and the joy of the more jovial one, saying that the will of fire burned immensely within him. Tobirama was very curious about the way the Uzumaki did to bring them back, since despite not having experienced the technique firsthand before, he felt that the jutsu was not the same as his own. To begin with, they did not show the typical signs of Edo Tensei. Well, since I didn't understand a couple of things about the technique, I improvised. I used shadow clones as sacrifices, and not knowing what it meant that I needed some DNA from those I was going to resurrect, well, I didn't do it. I simply thought of the first names that came to mind from Iruka-sensei's history classes, Naruto responded when the white-haired man asked. The Suiton user couldn't have been more surprised by his response. He had practically created a different variant of his technique. He didn't know the full extent he would have, but he definitely wanted to see it. While his brother and the Uchiha argued and fought among themselves, the second Hokage dedicated himself to training his summoner. It was clear that the academy had sabotaged him so that he would not become a genin, and that it was thanks to this special circumstance that he was one, so he would have to help the boy to be prepared for the shinobi world. The week between graduation and team selection was very busy for the blonde. Tobirama pushed him to the limit again and again without mercy, using hundreds of shadow clones to speed up the learning process. Hashirama and Madara also taught him things, although his main sensei was the white-haired one, since those 2 seemed like they couldn't be together without arguing or fighting all the time. She had already lost count of how many times the brown-haired man ran away, laughing at his friend and rival while he chased him, throwing fireball after fireball at him. By the time the day of team formation arrived, Naruto had already corrected all of his taijutsu and was creating his own with the help of his clones. His chakra control had improved, being able to walk on trees and walk on water. He knew some strategy, he was a master of traps, he could dispel the simplest genjutsus, he had basic knowledge of Fuinjutsu. His aim was perfect on fixed targets and decent on medium moving targets, and he had begun his elemental training. Even at that moment, he was in his classroom, he had more than 500 shadow clones training under the 3 resurrected ones. Looking back, she couldn't believe how drastic her life had changed since that night. His mind stopped wandering when Sakura and Ino came through the door shouting their victory and trying to claim the seat next to Sasuke. He looked at the pincat longingly. Until a week ago, he was in love with her, now he no longer felt anything about her. The nickname had made him see the stupidity of his infatuation. How ridiculous it was to pursue a woman who was obsessed with another and that she probably wouldn't survive the real world. Letting go of the green-eyed girl was almost as difficult as letting go of her orange jumpsuit. Those two things and her teasing were her childhood, one that the Suiton wearer made clear ended the moment he put on her hit I-8. He was wearing shinobi sandals, Anbu pants, a fishnet shirt, and a black jacket. The funny thing about leaving his monkey behind was that no one in his class had noticed his presence, although it wasn't surprising. He barely recognized himself. "Alright class, sit down and shut up," Iruka said to the boys. Seeing that no one was paying attention to him, he used his big head jutsu. Once everyone was quiet, he began to give his final speech about what was expected of them as the new genin of the village. Later, he listed the teams in order. Team 7, Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno and Sasuke Uchiha, your Jonin sensei is Kakashi Haddock. One moment. That baka didn't happen. How come he is with Sasuke-kun and me? The pincat asked, confused and annoyed. Due to special circumstances, Naruto obtained a field promotion, the teacher explained vaguely. And where is he? He hasn't even come to class, the green-eyed girl mocked. Just because you haven't noticed me doesn't mean I haven't come, the blonde commented. The entire class turned towards the voice and were surprised to see it. If it weren't for the whisker marks on him, no one would have recognized him. Naruto, is that you? Kiba asked incredulously. Not only had his clothes changed, his posture, tone of voice, and even his smell had changed. The same, he responded with a small smile. Everyone was left in a state of shock. It was incredible that the idiot in the class, the last one dead, had changed so much in a week. While everyone was surprised, Hinata smiled sweetly. She was glad that her crush had passed, even if they weren't on the same team. Sasuke looked at the blue-eyed man with a critical look. If someone had asked him his opinion about his classmate a week ago, he would have told them that he was a good-for-nothing dope, but at that moment he wasn't so sure. He mentally shrugged. There was no point in thinking about it. They were on the same team, so she would soon know if she had really improved or it was just appearances. Iruka continued naming the teams, and once he finished that, he gave a short speech again and left the classroom. A few minutes later, the Sensei Jonins entered and took away their respective teams, except for one, Team 7. After waiting half an hour for his sensei to show up, Naruto made a clone to take his place and left in a shunshin, leaving his teammates confused. Despite their doubts, neither of them asked what the Uzumaki had done, and they continued doing their thing, that is, the black-haired man continued in his melancholic meditation, and the pink-haired woman kept asking him on a date. After leaving his companions, Naruto headed to where his senseis were. Upon arrival, he found a scene that was slowly becoming more and more normal. Hashirama chased by an angry Madara and throwing fireballs at him. The blonde sweat dropped at that. They were supposed to be two of the strongest shinobi in history, and yet they acted like little children. The only thing that made him happy was that the white-haired man was not like those two. "Don't you get tired of always doing the same thing?" she asked the heir. "Unfortunately, no," answered a voice behind him. "Tobirama-sensei, don't you think we should do something to stop them?" he questioned curiously. "Leave them, they will stop at some point," the blue-eyed man nodded, accepting the answer. "How about team building? Shouldn't you be with them now? My teammates are Sakura and Sasuke. As for my Jonin sensei, he is a man named Kakashi Haddock. Since we had already been waiting for him for half an hour, I thought it prudent not to waste any more time. I left a shadow clone just in case," he explained. The younger Senju nodded. His logic was good, although he didn't like his team at all. A fangirl, an Uchiha Avenger, and a late-arriving sensei. Yes, she would definitely have a word with her student if it weren't for the fact that he wanted to remain a secret. Well, let's not waste any more time. "Start running," he instructed his most recent student. He nodded and began to walk around the training field, occasionally dodging some stray fire attacks from Madara. 2.5 hours later, the Jinchuriki received the memories of the clone that he had left in class, so he apologized to the nickname and used Shunshin to appear on the roof of the academy, where the silver-haired boy was reading an orange book. If the Jonin was surprised to see his student using Shunshin, he didn't let on. A couple of minutes later, the other two members of Team 7 arrived at the rooftop, where they were surprised to see that their partner was already there waiting for them. Very well, let's start with the introductions, the adult spoke happily. Sensei, what are we supposed to say? The pink cat asked. You know, likes, dislikes, hobbies and dreams for the future, he responded lazily. Why don't you start? She questioned again, earning an exasperated look from the man. Well, my name is Kakashi Haddock, I have my tastes, I have my dislikes too, hobbies, they are too young to know, dreams for the future, I have never thought about that. Your turn. The three of them thought the same thing. He only told us his name. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, my tastes, you will learn them with time, my displeasures are several, and your lateness is one of them, my hobbies, the normal ones for a shinobi, and my dreams for the future, you can ask anyone, it's common knowledge. The three of them stared at him dumbfounded. Kakashi because his attitude didn't fit with his record, and Sakura and Sasuke because that wasn't the Naruto they were used to. Your turn, little finger, the silver-haired man said to the pink-haired girl. My name is Sakura Haruno, not Pinky, my taste she looked at the black-haired man, my hobbies she looked at him again, and giggled, my dreams for the future she looked at him again, and let out a squeal. And your dislikes? She asked without much interest. Ino Pig and Naruto Baka, he responded with displeasure. The blonde didn't even flinch at that. A week ago he would have felt bad, but thanks to Tobirama-sensei, his obsession with the girl was gone. The Jonin looked at his latest student. My name is Sasuke Uchiha, I like few things and I dislike many things, I have no hobbies, and my dream, no, my goal, is to kill a certain person, he introduced himself, earning a fanatical squeal from the green-eyed girl. Great, a fangirl and an emo avenger, although the blonde one isn't so bad. I wonder what happened to change so much in such a short time, thought the masked man. After informing them of the next day's test and recommending they not eat breakfast, he left in a Shunshin. The Jinchuriki did the same 5 seconds later, leaving his companions confused and with several questions. Returning to the training ground where his clones and senseis were, he found Tobirama writing on a scroll. She was curious about it, but she knew that if it was important or concerned him, he would tell her. How was the meeting? He asked without stopping what he was doing. A waste of time. Our supposed sensei has only told us his name, that we are not official Gainans, and that we have the test to be so tomorrow. In addition to trying to trick us into not having breakfast, he responded, somewhat annoyed. If he hadn't met the white-haired man, he might have fallen for his little trick. He recognized that he had been very innocent, naive and idiotic in the past. All as a result of his stunted education. He appreciated that the Nidain was such an intense and demanding instructor, although at times he could be a slave driver. What are you up to? He questioned with the slightest notion of curiosity in his tone. According to him, the test is at 8. Given his tardiness, I'm leaning toward him arriving later, so I'll send a clone to training ground 7 while I have some light training with you. Of course, before that I will have a full breakfast. The Senju had no qualms about confiscating all of his ramen and forcing him to buy other food. He now had a perfectly balanced diet written by the man, and since he was always around, he knew whether he followed it or not. That's pretty good, the resurrected man commented, to which the boy swelled a little. But I think I taught you that better, he finished, earning a frown from the younger one. What do you mean? He asked, confused and annoyed. His plan was solid. You may not know what the man's test will be, but you do know who he is, so you can send some of your clones under Henge to obtain information from the Jonin, he explained to his student, who wanted to hit his head for not think about it. Making the seal of the cross, he summoned 5 Kage Bunshin and sent them to the village to investigate. Even though he had come a long way since he received the ninja sash from him, he still had a lot to learn, and he seriously appreciated having the suit and user guiding him. The second Hokage, on the other hand, was only half focused on the conversation. That did not mean that he was perfectly focused and understood everything that was said, it just wasn't his priority and his mind was on something else. He had noticed several significant differences in Naruto's Edo Tensei from his own. Not only did the resurrected ones not have the most characteristic marks of the jutsu, but they also did not have unlimited chakra. After watching Madara chase Hashirama throwing fire techniques all the time, he could notice that he was a little out of breath, not too much, but a little. In his original jutsu it did not pass, his unlimited chakra and his regeneration were the main reasons why the Edo Tensei was so feared. His regeneration seemed the same, and he retained all of his knowledge and abilities, at least as far as he knew. He also attempted to break the caster's control, since being the creator he knew that was possible. Instead of feeling like he was breaking free of his control, he felt like he was leaving the body he inhabited, hence why he stopped. He had to admit that this difference was very practical, it avoided the possibility that the summoned person could turn against his summoner. One of the unknowns he had was how much knowledge the caster needed about the person he wanted to bring back from the dead. The boy had said that he thought of names from history class, so he might have knowledge of life facts and techniques from him, but nothing personal. He questioned himself whether to ask her his doubts. He quickly dismissed it. He had helped the blonde become more intelligent and insightful, but his level was still average at best. Maybe later in the future he could help him discover the full capabilities of this new variant of Edo Tensei, but not at that time. He had a lot to learn. He idly wondered if he could turn the boy into a replica of himself. The image of his older brother appeared in his head, which made his left eyebrow tremble a little. Those two were too similar. The good thing was that the Uchiha kept him busy and away from his apprentice, so he might have a chance. He had had a Genin team when he was alive and helped train 3 others. Hamura Midokado and Kaharu Utatane, 2 of the members of his team, never showed themselves to be excellent shinobi. They were good, but not excellent. Terifu Akimichi was similar. Kagami Uchiha had turned out to be an exceptional young man and could handle it better than most of his clan. The problem with him was the same as what happened with all of his clan, either they allow themselves to be consumed by hatred or they tend to sacrifice themselves without taking a good look at the bigger picture. Kagami showed signs of following that second path. Either Anzo Shimura had come off as too military and his preconceived ideas of what a shinobi should be were not the best. From what little he had been able to gather since his invocation, his thoughts and ideals had become more radicalized. Hiruzen Tsurutobi, the other member of his team, had many aptitudes to be a great leader, that is why he named him his successor, but age had taken its toll on him and he had done many things that he did not like at all. He had Naruto. The blonde had a will of fire equal to that of his brother, a charisma that radiated naturally, the willpower to never give up, the empathy to understand others, and the talent to be a great shinobi. I had no doubt that he would do great things. Being Hokage would only be one of them. But for this she needed the proper education and training. He would give it to her. Even if he didn't make him his mini-me, he would make him an exceptional shinobi. Hashirama ran very close to him and a fireball almost hit him. Madara followed him while she threw a fire dragon at him and yelled a few things at him that no minor should hear. At least, I will prevent those 2 idiots from corrupting him with their stupidity and destructive desires, thought the little Senju. Without giving them any more importance, he continued writing on the parchment in his hand. Konoha was quiet at night. Only a few bars and clubs were open and there were more shinobi than civilians in them. A few Anbu patrols moved in the shadows, hidden from most eyes. Madara was aware of everything from the top of the Hokage mountain. The former Uchiha patriarch was thinking, pondering the latest events. He had been resurrected before his time and by someone who was not his disciple. He knew the Edo Tensei. He knew there was a way to break the connection with the summoner and have complete control of himself. But not with that variation. Every time he tried he ran the risk of dissipating. He was annoying. Not only could he not free himself from the control of whoever used the technique, but also whoever did it was a 12-year-old boy. He, Madara Uchiha, the strongest and most powerful of his clan, was under the control of a boy he barely qualified as a teenager. He was insulting. It was true that the boy had not forced him to do anything. He basically let him do whatever he wanted, which was mostly arguing and fighting with Hashirama, like when they were both little. He didn't understand himself sometimes. The way he acted was too childish. He got angry at the brunette for things he would normally ignore. And yet, he hadn't felt this happy since he was a child. He blamed this strange variant of the Edo Tensei for feeling this way. Somehow, the blonde's happy childish attitude had rubbed off on him and the older Senju's attitude hadn't helped. He was so immersed in his thoughts that he did not realize that his former friend and rival was behind him. Nice view. You do not agree? The black-haired man just nodded, pretending that he had known he was there when it wasn't true. It's incredible how much the village we founded has grown. Maybe in size, but people haven't changed that much. The Mokuten user frowned at his words. Are you saying that because of Naruto? She asked. He had not liked the attitude of the population towards the young Jinchuriki either. It's not just him. You may refuse to see it, but there is a lot of hate and pain in people. Even if they try to hide it, this world has no salvation, the Mangekyo Sharingan user responded solemnly. The Shadame Hokage did not like his words. It sounded like he had given up on the world. As if peace were not possible. And he refused to accept it. He failed, but he was sure Naruto could make it. Peace is possible. It just takes the right person to bring people together. A role model who shows the rest that there is always hope, she refuted calmly, making the Uchiha look at him. Who? He asked lamely, earning a look to which he snorted. If you really think that boy can do it, you're more naive than he remembered. It may be that you don't see it now. The boy is young and lacks skill. But that's what we're here for. My brother is already teaching him and he is learning in leaps and bounds. It's just a matter of time. Silence was his entire response. The black-haired man was not as optimistic as the brown-haired man, that's why he left Konoha and did what he did. That world had no future, hence his plans. I hope you can realize it soon were his last words before leaving. He wanted to say more, to convince his former friend, but he knew it would be of no use. She was very stubborn. He couldn't see the Uzumaki's full potential, either that or he didn't want to see it. He couldn't be sure. He decided to behave more maturely and help the young man with his training. After all, his wife had been a Jinchuriki like him and had her Mokuton, so it shouldn't be too difficult to help him with her Bijuu. Madara continued to stand there for hours, watching the village in silence. He would have liked to contact Zetsu and find out how the plans were going, but he had no way to contact him. The moon left and the sun arrived. Although she was at a great distance, his Sharingan allowed her to see his summoner in a training area with Tobirama, at the same time she saw one of his clones with two children in another area. He hadn't paid attention to who his teammates were, but he had seen the Uchiha fan on the boy's back, so he assumed he was the survivor of his clan. He hadn't been happy to discover the Uchiha massacre. Much less that it was one of their own who made it. But unlike the ignorant townspeople, he was able to realize that there was more behind the massacre than they were letting on. To top things off, he had sought information from Sasuke and didn't like what he heard. A spoiled, self-centered boy, with an average level of power, even though people flattered him as a genius, and an unhealthy obsession with killing his brother. He hadn't even bothered to find a strong woman to rebuild the clan. Overall, in his opinion, that child was a disgrace and unworthy of the Uchiha surname. His summoner would be more worthy of being an Uchiha than the black-haired man, and even though the blonde's childish attitude sometimes bothered him, he thanked Tobirama for making the boy more mature. Not that he would admit it. As much as he didn't want to admit it, the blue-eyed man had a lot of talent and potential. He didn't even remotely believe that he could stop the cycle of hatred, but he knew that in the future he would be a strong shinobi. Too bad he wasn't the Uchiha. He put that topic aside and looked at Training Ground 7. He was getting annoyed just by seeing that pathetic excuse for an Uchiha. She would have to see if there was a way he could create others with his genes. He would not allow the legacy of his clan to be tainted, or worse yet, lost, because of someone unworthy. He returned his gaze to where the Jinchuriki was, only to see Hashirama arrive. He spoke with his brother. From what he could read from his lips, the brown-haired man wanted to help in Naruto's training. The white-haired man nodded and asked the Uzumaki to come closer. "What's wrong, Tobirama-sensei?" she asked calmly. "My brother will be in charge of part of your training starting today. He will mainly teach you Doton techniques," he answered seriously. "Yes, and I also want to see if I can teach you the wood element. Can you imagine everything we could do together? The world will be a much greener place," the Shodaime Hokage proclaimed. Madara had to shake his head in dismay. His former friend was an idiot. The Mokuton is a Kekkei-Genkai, just like the Sharingan, only the former featured even less than the latter, and the boy wasn't even a Senju. What the hell was he thinking? Not that only you could use the wood element. The blonde questioned, very insecure. Even his summoner was smarter than his rival, the Mangekyou user mentally complained. "Yes, but who knows? Maybe you can too," he said with a smile. "Brother, that's not how genetics works," the Nidaime refuted exasperatedly. "Well, you told me that sometimes there are alterations in the DNA, and the Uzumaki and the Senju are cousin clans," the first Hokage protested. "Mutations, yes, and our clans also have a certain kinship, but what you propose is illogical and almost impossible," he tried to make him see reason. "We won't know until we try. Let's go, Naruto," she decided happily as she took the little one away. The blue-eyed man was too confused to resist. The Suiton user just sighed and shook his head in defeat. His brother was hopeless, and he didn't want her to infect his summoner with his stupidity. At the same time, on top of the Hokage mountain, Madara was ranting against his former friend while going from one place to the other. He was hopeless and he was an idiot. If she didn't want the Jinchuriki to go to waste, she would have to stop him. She preferred that the white-haired man take care of his training. "Look, Naruto, the most basic thing you have to know about Mokuton is that it is a combination of 3 parts. Doton, Suiton and natural energy," Hashirama explained. "Natural energy?" Naruto asked confused. "Yes, natural energy is basically the chakra that is in the environment. This has different properties than the chakra that living beings have. It is more dense, powerful and dangerous, but it is essential to create the Mokuton, since without it, instead of wood, by combining earth and water you would obtain mud," the Senju answered. "And how do I add natural energy to the technique? Wait, first how do I mix Doton and Suiton in a jutsu?" she questioned, not knowing how to start. Combining 2 elements is quite difficult, he admitted, but the easiest way is to concentrate 1 element in each hand. As for the natural energy, the hand seals themselves help to channel it, but if you depend solely on them, the techniques will be weaker than if you channel the natural energy and add it, he answered. The blonde nodded. He had learned to manipulate water. It wasn't his main element, that was wind, but when your sensei is the best Suiton user of all time, you learn to use that element decently. Tobirama's idea was for the boy to learn to control the 5 elements. He would teach him the water, as was natural, his brother would teach him the earth, and, apparently, the Mokuton, and if Madara did not object, the blue-eyed man did not want to force him, and the white-haired man could not convince his summoner to do so, he would teach him. I would show the fire. The wind would learn it on his own until they found someone who could teach him, since the Nidaime did not want Danzo near the Jinchuriki. They would also have to look for someone with an affinity for lightning. They knew the Kakashi had said affinity, but doubted his competence due to his unwarranted delays. Well, but first things first. I will teach you the basics of earth elemental manipulation, and after that I will teach you how to use Doton and Suiton simultaneously. Later I will help you create Mokuton and absorb natural energy, the training plan explained to him. Nodding, he began the first step of Doton manipulation, turning a leaf into dust with just your chakra. For the task he used 100 clones in addition to himself. He knew that after training he will have the test to become an official Genin, but he also knew that it was about teamwork. The day before, at night, the 5 clones he had sent to investigate his Jonin sensei gave him a lot of information. The man was famous in the shinobi world as Kakashi of the Sharingan or Copy Nin. His main element was Raiten, but thanks to his Sharingan, he has mastered Suiton and Doton. He also knows various Kaiten techniques and Futon fundamentals. Their test for the Genin teams was always the same, the Bell test. Basically it was working as a team, even though appearances dictate that only 2 will pass at best, collaborating despite discord. When he found out about the test, he didn't see any point in it. It didn't help that it was Tobirama who created said test. Despite his reasoning, it seemed to him that putting together 3 people who don't get along, who are barely shinobi, and expecting them to put aside their differences and cooperate was stupid. The white-haired man had to agree with him on that, but it was because the Sundaime had done poorly in team formation. They were supposed to not just put together 3 future Genins based on their abilities, but 3 people who could work well together. That was the most important thing, and his former disciple seemed to have forgotten it. Naruto's plan to pass the test. Talk to his colleagues and try to convince them what the real test was. What if that plan failed? Talk to the Hokage to request an apprenticeship. He was the town's Jinchuriki. He had to be a shinobi, and it was time for his damned condition to serve some purpose. If he was honest with himself, it most likely had to be plan B. He couldn't see himself convincing those 2 to work as a team with him or with each other. Sakura might want to work with Sasuke, but he didn't want to work with anyone. 2 hours after the time agreed by Kakashi to do the test, the blonde let his cage bunch and continue training while he ate something and retired to training field 7, where his potential teammates were. Upon arrival, he dispelled his clone and received the memories. Neither of them had had breakfast and they were tired and hungry. They had tried to ask him about his new abilities, or rather, the pink-haired woman had asked and the black-haired man had been attentive. His copy told them that he had been training that week before the teams were announced with someone willing to train him and had learned a thing or two. They asked him who his sensei was, but he told them that he wanted to remain a secret since he did not approve of an unassigned Jonin training an unofficial Genin. The green-eyed girl could see the logic. The black-eyed man too, but he was upset because he wanted to know who he was. In his mind, if the man had made the last dead man competent in a week, he, an elite Uchiha, was sure to become a Chunin or even Jonin rank shinobi. The clone had also tried to get his companions to eat, but they ignored him. He tried to come up with a joint plan for several possible scenarios, although he knew about the test he was not going to tell them, but they did not want to collaborate on that either. The original Naruto sighed after analyzing all his memories. It was clear that they were going to suspend the test. He had no doubts about it. Still, he was willing to give them one last chance when the test began. 3 hours after the agreed time, Kakashi showed up with a pathetic excuse about being late. Sorry, a black cat crossed my path and I had to come the long way, he excused himself. Next time use Shunshin, the blonde said dryly. His companions nodded in agreement, to which the Jonin sweat dropped. Without giving it much importance, he explained the objective of the test and the consequences for those who did not obtain a campaign. They had 1 hour to achieve it. The 3 hid in the forest. The black-haired man and the pink-haired girl did not look well enough for the silver-haired man to not notice them. On the other hand, the masked man was unable to find the blonde. Shrugging his shoulders, he took out his Icha book and began to read. This action confused the green-eyed woman while it angered the black-eyed woman, since to him it meant that the man considered him insignificant. From one moment to the next, a hand landed on both Genin's mouths and they were dragged to another place. When they released them, they saw the blue-eyed man in front of them and a copy of him behind each one. I'm sorry for the abruptness, but this made it more difficult for Kakashi-sensei to track them, the Jinchuriki apologized. Naruto Baka, what do you think you are doing? The fangirl shouted. First of all, thank you for pointing out our location with your shouts, he said sarcastically, making the aspiring Kunoichi blush with embarrassment. Secondly, this whole test is a setup. It's not about getting the bells, but about working as a team, she explained. Yes, of course, dope. The thing is that you're not strong enough to get a bell, and you want help, the Uchiha mocked. Exactly. Sasuke-kun is so cool that he doesn't need help. He'll just get the bells and we'll both pass. Right, Sasuke-kun? Said boy just grunted, annoyed. He would prefer to be alone, but if he had to choose between the Haruno and the Uzumaki, he would take the latter. At least he would have a rival to support him, not some useless fangirl. The blonde sighed. He knew this would lead nowhere, so he didn't insist. The black-haired man left the place followed by Sakura, who was behaving like a pathetic puppy. She was infinitely grateful to Tobirama-sensei for freeing her from her infatuation with the girl. Deciding that there was no point in even trying to obtain a bell. She sat in place and continued her elemental manipulation of Doton. At the moment she was only able to turn the edges into dust, which was impressive for her first day and not a primary affinity. Wow, I'm surprised to see you trying to master the elemental chakra. Shouldn't you be trying to take a bell from me, though? The silver-haired man spoke behind him. Well, it's never too early to improve your skills. As for the bell, I know that the real objective of the test is teamwork, and since my colleagues have already refused to cooperate, I don't see the point in wasting energy on something that in the end will be of no use, he replied with calm. The Genin. The Jonin was impressed that the boy had seen the true goal of the test. At the same time, it saddened him to know that the other two were informed about it and decided to ignore it. Tell me, Kakashi-sensei, I know that technically you are not my official sensei unless we approve, which we certainly want, but I would like to ask you a question, the blonde commented. You can do it. It's another thing for her to answer it for you, the older man stated, to which the younger boy nodded. I understand that you have a primary affinity for Raiden. Would you mind showing me the steps for said elementary manipulation? She asked. Do you have a primary affinity with earth and lightning? He questioned, surprised. Actually, my primary affinity is the Futon. But if I want to be the best Hokage of all time, I have to surpass the existing ones. I know Jiji masters the 5 elements, so that's my goal right now, she replied calmly. The masked man couldn't be more surprised. Apart from the Sundaime, very few managed to manipulate the 5 elements. He himself was only proficient in 3 and skilled in another, so it was surprising that a Genin had set such a high goal for himself. Do you already master any element? He asked, curious. Could you answer my question first, please, he asked politely. Oh yeah. The first step is to wrinkle a leaf with your chakra. It will be considered complete when you can make the leaf turn into a ball in less than 5 seconds, the blue-eyed boy nodded. The second is to light a light bulb with your chakra. You have to be careful or you could fry it or even make it explode, he instructed. Thank you. Regarding your question, I have mastered the water chakra control exercises. Also the first part of the wind. I can't do the second one because I don't have access to a waterfall, she explained. The man's only visible eye widened. He was 12 years old and had already mastered the Suiton exercises, and Futon was only halfway done because he had no way of accessing the second exercise. He was also trying to dominate Doton right in front of him. The boy was a prodigy. The clock bell rang. It was noon. The test time was up. It was time to announce the results. Unfortunately, they were not favorable. After freeing Sakura from the Genjutsu and pulling Sasuke out of the ground, the 3 aspiring Genins stood in front of Kakashi. The silver-haired boy had originally planned to give them a second test by tying one to the post and telling the other 2 not to feed him, but after hearing the blonde saying that he had announced the true purpose of the test and they had ignored him, don't do it well, I think we all know the result of the test. It is not like this. The Jonin questioned rhetorically. The Pinkat looked at the ground depressed. The black-haired man clenched his fists in frustration. The blonde just shrugged. Not only do you not have a bell, but you two have never even discovered the true objective of the test, he said, looking at the green-eyed girl and the black-eyed girl. They were confused and looked at the blue-eyed man, who shrugged his shoulders again. I told you. The real objective of the test was teamwork, but he didn't listen to me, the Jinchuriki commented casually, further depressing the girl and pissing off his partner. Yes, that's why, Sakura, Sasuke, you will return to the academy to take a remedial course. Naruto, I'm going to talk to the Hokage so I can take you as an apprentice, he announced. The Uzumaki was slightly surprised by this. It was true that his plan was to ask his Jiji to be an apprentice to some Jonin, but he didn't expect that Kakashi would ask for a mentorship with him. The Uchiha was fuming. He was the last of his clan, an elite, and yet this Jonin preferred to teach the loser over him. He was inconceivable, unacceptable. He would complain to the board as soon as layoffs occur. Your hit I ate, the silver-haired man asked. Haruno gave up her ninja band completely depressed, while her lover gave it up reluctantly and angry. The only thing that kept her from confronting the man was the certainty in her head that her counsel would tell her again as soon as she told them what had happened. "See you here in 3 hours," he told the blonde before leaving in a shunshin. The black-haired man glared daggers at his former partner before leaving. The Pinket just followed him like a beaten puppy. Once their failed companions were gone, they sighed and returned to the training ground where their resurrected senseis were. Upon arriving, the first thing she realized was that Tobirama and Madara were talking. That was strange. Those two hated each other, especially the white-haired man and the black-haired man. "How was the test?" asked the Suiton user. "As one would expect. They didn't listen to me and we failed. I told them about the real reason for the test, but they didn't want to listen to me, so I stayed in a fixed place doing the elemental manipulation exercise of the earth. Kakashi-sensei found me. I asked him about the Raten manipulation exercises. He told me and, surprisingly, when he failed my companions he told me that he would ask Hokage Jiji to be his apprentice," he informed her. "That's good. We will no longer have to look for a jonin to train you. Although I still don't like his lateness," said the younger Senju. "Truly, that boy is a disgrace to the Uchiha clan," the Sharingan user sputtered. While the Nidaime and the Genin discussed their training plan, which they had to update due to their new role in the village, and the upcoming lessons from Madara, who had offered to help, the black-haired man was meditating how to prevent his bloodline from being lost. Recent events had confirmed to him that Sasuke was not a worthy successor, and that the Uchiha clan would fall with him if he did not do something. He had been watching the team test from the top of Hokage Mountain and couldn't be more embarrassed by the boy's pathetic performance. He was aware that if his plan worked, everyone would live in an ideal world genjutsu, but still, until then, he wanted his clan to be recognized as a strong one, something that wouldn't happen if the only Uchiha was a spoiled child and without talent. Elsewhere, in the Hokage's office, the Sundaime and all the Jonins who had received a team from the graduates were waiting for someone to arrive. "I'm sorry for the delay, but I was in the secretary's office looking for the necessary papers to take on an apprentice," the man excused himself. "Do I have to assume that Team 7 has failed and you are going to take one as an apprentice?" Hiruzen asked. "Hi," he responded lazily. "I see," he commented, smoking his pipe. "We will continue talking about that when the rest announce the results of their tests." So one by one the Jonins announced who approved and who didn't. In the end only teams 8 and 10 passed. "Can you tell us what happened now, Kakashi?" he asked the village leader. "Hi. Like every year, my test was the bell test. Sakura was quickly knocked out by a C-rank Genjutsu. Sasuke was quick to attack me, and I defeated him with a double suicide decapitation jutsu. Naruto didn't even attack me. I found him training in his manipulation of the earth element. When he appears he has already mastered the Suiton and the first part of the Futon, the latter being his primary affinity, the second part he has not been able to do due to not having a waterfall. Honestly, I'm surprised he's come this far since graduation." He wasn't the only one surprised. Everyone in that room was surprised at that news. Asuma, in addition to surprise, was also curious. Futon users were very rare in the village. From what he told me, he continued his dream is to surpass the previous Hokages, and since he knows that you, Hokage-sama, master the 5 elements, he has taken it as a step towards that goal. The Sundaime smiled. He felt proud of the figure of his grandson. If what the silver-haired man had told him was true, and he had no reason to lie to him, the boy was a genius like his father. I asked him why he didn't attack me, and he told me that he knew that the test consisted of teamwork. He had previously warned his teammates about him, but they didn't listen to him, so he decided not to waste time confronting me and dedicated himself to his training, he concluded. "Am I wrong to believe that you want to take Naruto-kun as an apprentice?" Hiruzen asked. "No, Hokage-sama, that is my intention. By the way, here are Sakura and Sasuke's Hitai," they answered and put the 2 ninja bands on the table. The older Sarutobi let out smoke from his pipe. He knew that the council would find out about this and demand that Naruto be returned to the academy and Sasuke be Kakashi's apprentice. He could already hear the screams and protests of the civilian party. "If that's all, you can go, except you, Kakashi. I have to talk to you about a couple of things." "Hey, Hokage-sama." All the Jonin except the silver-haired one left the office, some to do missions, others to hang out, and others to do their things. "Kakashi, be honest with me. Did you notice anything strange about Naruto-kun during the test or before?" she asked him with a serious expression. "Hi. His attitude is very different from the records. Also, as much as I want to think that he is a genius like his father, it seems very strange to me that he has been able to advance so much in elemental manipulation. In just 1 week, even if someone helped him, which is doubtful given his reputation, he shouldn't have advanced that much, especially if Futon really is his only primary affinity," he stated his opinion. "What is your theory?" She questioned her with a stern voice, although the reality is that she was worried about the figure of her grandson. I think your current attitude is the authentic one. It wouldn't be strange given his situation with the town that all these years he has been wearing a mask to prevent people from attacking him and, after what happened that night, maybe take it off and show his true self, he replied. The Nidaime student nodded thoughtfully. He was just as he feared. He had always suspected that the blonde was hiding his true feelings and thoughts so as not to worry him. Now he had confirmation from one of his best jonins. You can leave, he said to the masked man, who just nodded and left. I'm so sorry for what you've had to go through, Naruto-kun. I'll make it up to you. No one will hurt you again. Naruto showed up at training ground 7 at the agreed time. He wasn't sure if the man would be on time or late again, but he wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. He wasn't disappointed when he appeared in a shunshin of leaves not a minute later. Hello Kakashi-sensei, the blonde greeted happily. Hello Naruto. I hope you're ready, since your training starts now, the silver-haired man announced with an eyeful smile. I'm ready, the blue-eyed man stated with conviction. Very good. Since during the test I couldn't see your skills, we're going to have a one-on-one combat so I can determine your skill levels. Do not hesitate to come to me with the intention of killing, she told him while taking out a kunai from his bag. While those two were training, the Hokage had found himself dragged into a council meeting. He knew what that meeting was about. It was pretty obvious in his mind. It was clear that the Uchiha had complained to the council about failing the test and being sent back to the academy. Thank you all for coming. I won't waste any more time and I'll get straight to the point. This meeting is to discuss Kakashi Haddock's decision to fail Team 7 and send Sasuke Uchiha back to the academy, Hamura reported. That is not fair. It's obviously the demon brat's fault that he failed. I think the most appropriate thing would be to send the demon brat back to the academy and have Uchiha-sama become Kakashi-san's apprentice, a civilian said, to which all the civilians agreed. No. Sasuke failed the test completely just like his classmate Sakura Haruno. The only one who realized the meaning behind the test was Naruto, and that is why Kakashi has taken him as an apprentice, the Sundaime refuted. The civilian side rose up in protests about this and demanded that the blonde leave his position as the copy ninja's apprentice and the black-haired man take his place. The elders, although not as vocal, agreed with them. Silence, the Sarutobi shouted, you have no right to give an opinion on the choices of my shinobi. Kakashi has chosen and I support his decision. Sasuke will be sent to the academy for a remedial course and then placed in the reserves. Naruto will continue as Kakashi's apprentice and there is nothing more to talk about. The civilians wanted to continue protesting, but Hirazen's murderous instinct silenced them. The shinobi side, very wisely, stayed out of everything. They didn't really care either way, so they didn't see the need to intervene either. Without further ado, he ended the meeting while sending a warning look to the civil councillors. They had already ruined the life of his grandson, figure enough, not anymore. Back at training ground 7, Naruto was on the ground completely exhausted while his Jonin sensei stood breathing somewhat heavily. He wouldn't admit it to anyone, but he really had a hard time winning over his student. His taijutsu was decent, maybe a little sloppy, but he believed it was because he was trying to develop one to combine with his shadow clones. His genjutsu detection and dispelling wasn't bad, he could identify and dispel C-rank genjutsus. His ninjutsu was by far the best in his repertoire. He had been surprised that he knew several water jutsus, some of them with reduced hand seals. Not to mention his ability to command dozens of Kage Bunshin like they were nothing. He had definitely hit the student jackpot. He idly wondered if this was how the Sannin Jiraiya felt when he was given his sensei, Minato Namikaze, as a student. There was still the question of how he learned those techniques, but that would be for another time. He looked at his apprentice again, it seemed like he was recovering, he was even already standing up. It was obvious that he had great stamina and recovered quickly. Well, now what are we going to do, Kakashi-sensei? Asked a fairly recovered blonde. Well, if you still have chakra left, we can continue with your elemental doton manipulation, the silver-haired man offered. I have 200 clones doing the earth manipulation exercise somewhere else, and yes, I still have a field left. If you want, we can start with the manipulation of Raiten, she told him, breathing normally. Kakashi's only visible eye widened. He had 200 Kage Bunshin training elsewhere, he had fought him spending a lot of chakra and he still had to spend. How much chakra did the boy have? Yes, I have definitely hit the jackpot, thought the masked man with a hidden smile. Putting those thoughts aside, he walked over to a tree and handed it a leaf. Just as she suggested to him, she would help him with the manipulation of the lightning element. Hours later, when the sun was already setting on the horizon, they called it a day and informed him that they would continue their training the next day at 8 a.m. With an eye smile, he said goodbye to his student and left in a shunshin. The Jinchuriki slowly dissipated the clones he had been training with to crumple the leaves. He had barely managed to wrinkle the edges, although, according to his sensei, it was normal for him to struggle as a primary Futon user. Once he finished there, he returned to the place where his clones trained with their resurrected senseis. Over the hours, several clones had dissipated to transmit knowledge to the rest about progress, so that, of the 200 that existed at the beginning, 137 remained. He was quite happy with his progress. Thanks to his better chakra control and Hashirama's advice, he was almost finished with the exercise of turning a leaf into powder. He was ecstatic with his progress so quickly. Aburama had theorized that his affinity for wind was so strong that it overshadowed his possible secondary affinities of water and earth. It was the only possible explanation for him to have mastered the Suiton exercises so quickly, and he was on his way to mastering Doton quite quickly as well. Be that as it may, the fact is that he was making exceptional progress in those areas. Iraton was clear that it would take time, and his classes to master the fire element with Madara would not be until the next day. After gradually dissipating his aftershocks to assimilate all the information without causing problems in his brain, he said goodbye to his senseis and went home. There she prepared a proper dinner for herself. She missed Raymond and had to see if she could at least go to Ichiraku sometime. She then got ready to go to sleep. I was tired. The exhaustion of his clones took place along with everything else, aggravating his exhaustion. If it weren't for her stamina and his willpower, even with the gradual dissipation, he would have collapsed on the spot. He let out a yawn as he climbed into bed. It had been an interesting and very productive day. She expected the next day to be the same, especially considering the training with the former Uchiha patriarch. His last thought before falling asleep was an animated illustration of himself throwing fire jutsus at an angry and jealous Sasuke. His rivalry with the black-haired man had not completely disappeared. Naruto woke up with a smile. Since the night of the incident with Mizuki and the Forbidden Scroll, his life had improved drastically. Yes, the town still hated him, but now he knew why, and he had several more important people in his life. Tobirama was like a strict father who practically asked for perfection. Hashirama was like a cool uncle with whom he had fun and learned things. Madara was more like the grumpy but still loved member of the family. Then there was Kakashi-sensei, maybe an older brother. He was ecstatic with the new members of his family. He already had a grandfather in the Hokage, an uncle in Tuchi, an older cousin sister in Aim, and an overprotective older brother in Iruka, and now he had more. The only thing missing would be a mother figure, a grandmother and perhaps an aunt. She thought she remembered that Hashirama Ajusan was married. She would have to ask him to bring her back, then she would only be missing a mother and a grandmother. Putting all that aside, he got up and began to prepare everything for the day. The first thing was an abundant and balanced breakfast. Then she showered, got dressed, secured her kunai and shuriken bags, as well as checking that the weapons were there and okay, and left his apartment. It was still 7, so he had an hour to spend with his resurrected senseis before meeting his Jonin sensei. He laughed to himself. He was sure that his father would be super jealous if he knew about his 4 teachers. It didn't take him long to reach the place where the 3 former shinobi were waiting for him. The brown-haired man was smiling at him and waving energetically. The black-haired man looked at him with his arms crossed. The white-haired man looked at the Uchiha with narrowed and suspicious eyes. Yes, nothing outside of his new normal. Naru-chan, today you will train with Dara-chan, but that doesn't mean you have finished my training. So I hope you give me 100 clones to continue your training, the Mokuton user said happily. The Sharingan user sent him an annoyed look and it was obvious that he wanted to send him a fire jutsu, but he restrained himself. With a gesture of his hands, he motioned for the blonde to follow him, which he did without protest. For the next hour, he and his Kage Bunshin went through the exercise of burning a leaf, as well as learning the fireball jutsu. According to what Madara told him, the technique was basic for his clan, and one member was not recognized as an Uchiha and could not wear his symbol until he learned to use the jutsu for the approval of the adults. The blue-eyed man was quite surprised, although in a positive way, that the man told him about his clan and his time. He had heard many things about the Uchiha, both from the villagers and from Sasuke, but he never fully believed it. He now had confirmation from a former Uchiha patriarch about truly what it was like to be an Uchiha. It must be said that it was something different from what the rest said. On the one hand, the black-haired man recognized that they had rivals, not many since the real Uchiha are born fighters, but there were people who could face them like the Senju. On the other hand, although it was true that fire was the most common primary affinity in the clan, there were several members with other primary affinities, such as one of their late little brothers, who had an affinity for lightning instead of fire. The Sharingan allows you to copy the enemy's jutsu if they use all the hand seals that the technique requires. If you use reduced stamps, they cannot copy it. They also can't copy an elemental affinity, so if they don't train to develop a secondary affinity for them, the jutsus will always be weaker than what a natural user of the element could do. Those and many other things he discovered in that hour about the Uchiha and the Sharingan. It was fascinating for the boy, and he listened to everything carefully. He didn't quite understand why the black-haired man was telling him, but he didn't ask either. He was happy to obtain such information. As he had told Tobirama several times, he never knew when information might come in handy. It was a little disappointing when his time ran out and he had to say goodbye to go to the meeting with his Jonin sensei. He was really enjoying his lecture. She was much more entertaining than the ones Iruka gave at the academy. He arrived 2 minutes early. However, his sensei was already there leaning on one of the posts and reading her orange book. He didn't know why so many men liked that book. Many times he caught his Jiji reading a similar book. "Oh, Naruto, I see you've already arrived," he commented as he put away his icha. "Hello Kakashi-sensei. What are we going to do today?" he asked excitedly. "I've been thinking about it and I've created a schedule for us. Starting today, we will have 2 hours of physical training and taijutsu as soon as we meet. Then we will do 1 or 2 missions, depending on how long it takes us to complete them. We will have a 1-hour lunch break right after. We will spend the afternoons training with your chakra control, Jinjutsu, elemental manipulation, ninjutsu, and anything else we want to add in the future. The training will end at 6 p.m, so you have a couple of hours to rest or whatever you feel like. This will be our training regimen from Monday to Saturday. Sunday will be our day off," he explained. The blonde was bouncing on the spot with excitement. He couldn't wait to get started. And he didn't have to. The silver-haired man attacked him without warning and he barely dodged the blow. It seemed that his training that day began with a practice match. After half an hour of fighting, the masked man ordered the blue-eyed man to walk around the clearing 15 times. He then had to do squats, sit-ups, push-ups and other exercises. To top off the training, they fought again. The Jonin believed that the best way to improve his taijutsu was with practice in combat. At 10, they wrapped up their morning training and went to the mission room to get a D rank. Naruto wasn't too excited about how mundane the missions were, but he did them without protest. In the end they managed to make 2 before lunch. Kakashi took them to a small place frequented more by shinobi than civilians, and they placed their order. The Haddock was surprised that the boy didn't order ramen when he was on the menu. He tried to ask about it casually, and the Genin explained that he was on a diet to improve his physical development and be taller. The former Anbu captain nodded in understanding. He knew that the Uzumaki was the shortest of his age, and it was a sensitive topic for him. They spent the rest of the hour discussing the external training that Jinchuriki was doing. The copy nin was curious how Doton's elemental manipulation was going and if he was doing anything else. Although hesitant at first, Naruto answered truthfully on the topic. There was no point in him hiding his progress from his sensei. Besides, lying at that moment could cause him more problems in the future than he was worth. To say that the Yondaime's former student was surprised would be a gross understatement. He knew that the boy could create a large number of shadow clones and that this greatly accelerated the training. But that was ridiculous. Not even 2 weeks had passed since he graduated from the academy and he had already mastered the water element along with several techniques. He had completed the first half of the wind element, he was about to move on to the second half of the earth element and had already started with the exercises of the fire and lightning elements. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made that he was the last dead person in his class. With everything he had done in his short time as a shinobi, how was it possible that the teachers at the academy didn't realize his potential? Shrugged. Thinking about the past didn't make much sense when it didn't affect the future, although she still bothered him and he would talk about it with the Hokage. For the moment he would focus on the gold mine that was his apprentice. A month had passed since Team 7 failed the bell test. Many things had happened since that day. The first would be the investigation the Hokage did when Kakashi told him about his suspicions about Naruto's time at the academy. Hiruzen had to agree with the man about how incongruous the facts were. The idea that the blonde was the last of his class didn't square with all the talent he had shown since he got his hit I-8. At the same time that the Sundaime sent someone to investigate the case, Haddock himself also went to the place one day to get his answers. Unfortunately, on his way he ran into Sasuke and Sakura. Flashback: the Jonin was moving through the halls of the academy looking for Iruka Yamino when he came across the failed Genins he had the misfortune of testing out a week ago. Wow. Look who we have here. Have you realized how pathetic the dope is and have you come looking for me? The Uchiha asked arrogantly. Puff, that baka is useless. It's obvious that Sasuke-kun is better, commented his annoying fangirl. A small crowd of students and a few teachers watched the conversation curiously. The silver-haired man mentally sighed. He didn't expect to find them that day. Oh well, might as well lower his egos. Not at all. Naruto is probably almost anyone's dream apprentice. I'm just here to talk to his former Chunin instructor. I'm surprised that someone as talented as Naruto was the last of your class, she replied with a lazy tone. What does that dope have that I don't have? The black-haired man protested angrily. Let's see, he said while pretending to think he is hardworking, attentive, he learns quickly, he has an energy, resistance and chakra that makes most jonins look ridiculous, he has a natural talent for ninjutsu, traps and infiltration, plus of a positive attitude that makes it very easy to teach. The correct question would be, what do you have that he doesn't have? The humiliated boy stomped away, cursing the blonde and the jonin under his breath. The pincat followed her in love with her like a lost puppy while he tried to cheer him up and assured her that he was the best one for her. Fin flashback from that day on, Sasuke added Kakashi and Naruto to his list of revenge for humiliating him in such a way. It's not like those two knew or cared. They both had a very low opinion of the last Uchiha. The second thing that had happened was the reanimation of Mito Uzumaki Senju through the Ito Tensei. It was something that the Jinchuriki thought about for several days before proposing it to his teachers. Flashback Hashirama-sensei, can I talk to you? The blonde asked the brown-haired man. Of course, Neri-chan. What do you need? She questioned with a smile. Could you tell me about your wife? She asked him. Myth-chan. Of course, after all, they were both from the same clan, she replied and quickly began to talk to him about his partner. First he began by describing her physically. Then she told him about her character and way of being. Finally she told him some stories of their time together and the woman's accomplishments. Wow, Mito Abachan was great, the blue-eyed man proclaimed excitedly. Yes it was. Sometimes I miss her, she told him with a sad smile. Do you want me to bring her? I can bring her with the Ito Tensei like I did with you, he offered. That would be fantastic. Let's go with my brother. I'm sure he'll want to see how you do it, he instigated. Before he could say a word, he was already being dragged by the arm by the wood user. In a short time they were in front of the Nidaime Hokage, who was looking at his brother for his antics. What's happening? She asked with a sigh. Neri-chan is going to use the Ito Tensei to bring Mito-chan. I thought you would want to see it, she replied with a big smile. That caught the younger Senju's immediate interest. He had been able to obtain limited information of the technique on his own. He still had several doubts that he has not been able to resolve. Maybe seeing it firsthand could help you. A little uncomfortable by the white-haired man's attentive gaze, he created a cage bunshin to perform the jutsu. He took a deep breath and remembered everything the brown-eyed man had told him about his wife while he was doing the hand seals. Tiger snake dog dragon snake. A coffin appeared where his clone was. The lid fell and he revealed a red-haired woman with black eyes. Her hair was tied up in two buns with stamped as iron earrings dangling. On her forehead there was a seal that looked like a diamond. Mito-chan, the Shadaime Hokage, shouted before running to hug his partner. Tobirama looked at the last hand seal the boy had made. It was supposed to be a clap, not another snake seal. That change must have been the cause of the alteration of his jutsu. The Genin, unaware of his father figure's epiphany, watched a reunion of his uncles with a smile. He was glad that he had made the brown-haired boy so happy. Plus he now had an aunt. He was only missing a mother and a grandmother. In flashback other notable things that had happened were the dismissal of several academy instructors, the revision of the curriculum, Naruto's completion of elemental manipulation, doing joint D-rank missions with other teams and training with them, the coup of reality of the blonde, realizing Hinata's crush on him, Mito's introduction to Fuinjutsu along with lessons about girls. Meeting the green beast of Konoha, its mini-clone, and the horrible sunset Jinjutsu, he still shuddered when he remembered it. And his confrontation with Sasuke and Sakura. The latter was a desperate and pathetic attempt by his former classmates to prove that the Uchiha was better and deserved the learning that the Uzumaki was doing. Flashback Naruto was at the Team 7 training ground practicing his latest technique, Earth Element. Earth Wall. Kakashi-sensei had shown it to him the day before and he almost had it. He had originally used shadow clones to speed up the process, but since it was already almost perfect, he decided to finish it himself. Once he had done so, he would try to reduce the hand seals. He was about to do the jutsu again when a dope scream stopped him. He would know that voice anywhere. She rolled her eyes as she saw him and the banshee entering the training ground. He complained to himself. He didn't want to waste his time with them, and the silver-haired boy had gone with Guy to do one of his typical challenges. It was unlikely that he would return anytime soon, given the challenge the other Jonin had proposed. What do you want, team? I'm busy, he said without much desire. Fight me, he demanded. No, he answered without further ado and tried to return to his training. What's wrong, dope? Are you afraid of losing to me? She mocked. No. I simply don't want to get in trouble for fighting with a student at the academy, he replied boredly. Don't lie, baka. You're scared because you know that Sasuke-kun is much better than you, Haruno screeched. Not for the first time, the Nine Tails container wondered how the hell he could have been in love with that girl. She was loud, moody, obnoxious and a useless, pathetic fangirl. The only good thing was her intelligence and she didn't use it. I have already said why I am not going to fight. If you believe me or not, that's your problem, she commented as if nothing had happened. His senseis, especially Tobirama and Madara, had taught him not to be provoked by the enemy. He wasn't going to get into trouble just because the Uchiha had his pride hurt. The black-haired man made several hand seals and threw a fireball at him. Despite having his back turned, he heard clearly when the black-eyed man pronounced his jutsu, so he made 3 hand seals. The water of the lake moved and created a wall behind him that protected him from the Kekkei technique. The black-haired man's smug smile faded into an expression of rage as he saw how the dope had countered his jutsu. He couldn't say or do anything else because Kekkei-Genkai arrived from their competition and took the boy away for attempted assault on a village shinobi. They also took the green-eyed girl as an accomplice. In flashback, if it had been up to the Hokage, both of them would have been removed from the shinobi program forever, but unfortunately the civilian council got in the way. Since the two were still civilians, they fell under his jurisdiction, so nothing much happened to them. Putting those thoughts aside, the apprentice and his sensei entered the mission office with the intention of obtaining a more difficult mission. A C rank shouldn't be much of a problem for them. Things had gone wrong. Not to the point of being completely dangerous, far from it. That did not mean that the mission had escalated to another level. After all, no C rank involves missing ninjas. Originally it seemed like a simple mission. Escort a bridge builder to his house in Nami no Kuni. Because it was supposed to be a simple mission, Kakashi politely declined his leader's proposal to involve another team. He wasn't sure if he had chosen right or wrong in this regard. Another team means more shinobi to protect the client, but having fresh Gainans on a high-ranking mission was more of a harm than a help. There was also the option of returning. The client had deliberately lied when he requested the mission. That automatically gave them the right to break the contract and turn around. The problem was that his student wanted to continue. He was aware of the risk, and he did not want to continue out of a selfish desire. On the contrary, he wanted to continue because he did not want more people to suffer at the hands of an imbecile hungry for power and money. I could understand his point. In fact, I admired his altruistic spirit, but that did not take away the risks. She knew that the blonde was no ordinary Gainen. He could most likely give a chunin a run for his money, maybe even a special jonin, but he lacked experience and he didn't want to put him in danger. Good. We will continue with the mission, he finally accepted, defeated. The blue-eyed boy smiled happily and Tazuna sighed in relief. He was truly afraid that the two shinobi would leave him to his fate. Without them, there would be no hope for his people. Naruto was happy to continue the mission. He had felt sorry for the old man's story and wanted to help his country. Maybe if it was just him and his Jonin sensei, he would have considered returning to the village, but they weren't alone. Their resurrected senseis were with them hidden in the surrounding forest. But there was no risk of anything happening to them. They could go to the wave, help finish the bridge and kill that bastard businessman. Although I couldn't see them. She had the clear impression that Hashirama and Mito were horrified and furious at what they had heard, and that Tobirama and Madara were disgusted by this Gato's actions. I didn't understand how such evil people could exist. He could somewhat understand the lust for power and riches. People always tended to want more, whether out of selfishness or vanity. But when it gets to the point where you pressure innocent people to the point of extreme poverty, that's when you've crossed the line, a lot. He would never allow such a thing if he could help it, and on this occasion he can. Their Jonin sensei is a powerful and famous ninja in his own right. His resurrected senseis are some of the most powerful people to ever walk the earth. He, well, recognized that he was not as great as them, but he could still contribute something. They continued on their way, alert for any other danger. They boarded a boat that took them to the island. The Ito Tensei were walking on water. They returned to land without any problem and continued on their way. At no time did they let their guard down. Naruto threw a kunai where he felt a chakra signature. He didn't need to check to know that the guy had made kawarimi with some small animal. Teacher and student were on guard. They knew the enemy was close. A huge sword crossed the air. The Jonin threw the client to the ground while himself and his student also crouched down. The weapon embedded itself in a tree and the next moment a man appeared on top. Wow. Look what we have here. Kakashi of the Sharingan. No wonder the demon brothers lost. The lost ninja spoke. Zabuza Mamachi, the demon of the mist, former member of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist, the silver-haired man commented. Wow, you know about me. That honor. She spoke sarcastically and the black-haired man mocked. Naruto, protect the client. I'll take care of him, the silver-haired man ordered. The blonde nodded and created 3 shadow clones to surround Tazuna. Hidden Mist Jutsu, the enemy named his technique. A thick fog surrounded the area. The former Anbu captain raised his hit I-8 to reveal his Sharingan eye. It didn't help much. -8 points. The pharynx, the spine, the lungs, the liver, the jugular, the aorta, the kidneys and the heart. Which one should I choose? She heard herself in the fog. Accompanied by his words, he released his killer instinct in order to make the boy panic. Unfortunately for him, it didn't work. The Uzumaki was used to it thanks to his resurrected sensei, what's more, that was nothing compared to his own. The Haddock was going to say some words to try to make the boy not afraid when he realized that he really wasn't. He was focused on the front and didn't seem the least bit scared by the killer instinct. He smiled under his mask. Her apprentice was a box full of surprises. Not that she was complaining. At times like these he couldn't help but think that her sensei would be very proud of her son. "You're brave. I admit that, but you are no match for me." "Now die," said the swordsman, appearing over the blue-eyed men and the client. The Jinchuriki added chakra futon to his kunai and faced it against the Kubikirabacho. He had to send chakra to his arms and anchor himself to the ground so as not to retreat. The Haddock appeared behind the Mamachi and stuck the kunai where the heart would be. The enemy turned into water. A second later another Zabuza appeared behind him and stabbed him with his sword. The Konoha Jonin also turned into water. "Awesome. Being able to copy my technique even in the fog," praised the lost ninja. "Naruto, do you know any wide area wind jutsu?" The teacher asked his student. "Yes, one," he answered. "Use it," he indicated. "Futon. Great advance," proclaimed the youngest. The fog was quickly cleared, revealing the opponent over the lake. "How I hate wind users," commented Kiri's former shinobi. The copy nin went after the other jonin and they faced each other over the water. The black-haired man tried to capture him with a water prison technique, but his opponent noticed it in time and did a kawarimi. The next few minutes were a demonstration of various water jutsus until the dog summoner was able to play with his mind to make him believe he could see the future and take him down with a water dragon. Yuhi coughed a little. "Can't see the future?" she asked him. "Yes, and I foresee your death," he answered. Before he could kill him, a pair of senbon needles stabbed into his neck. "It seems that your vision was accurate. Thanks for weakening it." "I've been hunting him for a while," said a masked young man coming out of the forest. "You're a Kiri hunter, right?" she questioned as she checked the man's pulse. There was not. "Exactly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll get rid of him," she replied before leaving with the body and the sword in a shunshin. The silver-haired man let out a sigh and lowered his hit I-8. The second later he fell to his knees. "Kakashi-sensei," the blonde called worriedly. "I'm fine. I'm just low on chakra. Using the Sharingan consumes a lot of chakra," she explained. "You will be fine." The blue-eyed man questioned worriedly. "I will be. For now we should continue. Tazuna, is your house very far away?" "Not much. Just over an hour's walk," answered the bridge builder. "Naruto, do you mind carrying me?" "I'm very tired," the former Anbu captain asked, somewhat embarrassed. "Of course, Kakashi-sensei. You worry about resting," he assured her. He created several cage bunshin to protect the client and help him carry his master. Once they were ready, they continued on their way. A slight blur on the periphery of his right eye told him that his resurrected senseis wanted to speak with him as soon as he was free. They arrived at the builder's house without incident. There they were greeted by Tsunami, Tazuna's daughter, who was very happy to see her father safe and sound and thanked them both for protecting him. Once the blonde left Kakashi on the bed in the guest room, he left under the pretext that he was going to explore the terrain and set up some traps just in case. The Jonin agreed. Once outside, he created several cage bunshin to do what he said he was going to do while he went to where his resurrected senseis were. He didn't have to go far into the forest for it. "Good. Now that you are here, we must discuss your training to prepare for your next battle," said the white-haired man as soon as the boy appeared. "What do you mean, Tabarama-sensei?" asked the blue-eyed man. The hunter ninja was fake. He is obviously an ally of Zabuza. He was watching the entire fight and not only did he act alone at the end, but instead of following the protocol of cutting off the head and destroying the body, he took it whole and in one piece. Not to mention that the senbon needles are the most difficult weapon to kill with and practical to disable and feign death, explained the minor Senju. Then why didn't they eliminate it? The Genin questioned confused. It didn't make sense in his head. That fake hunter ninja wouldn't have been any problem for them. So why didn't they kill him? It was not a real threat, the Nidaime responded calmly. "Remember that we want to keep our presence a secret. We are not going to intervene for something that is not life or death. Don't worry, Neri-chan. We will train you so that next time you can defeat them on your own," the Shodaime told him happily. "We will make you as strong as possible in the time we have. We will most likely have a week or two at most. We will use cage bunshin to speed up your training, but don't expect miracles either." The last part was reported by her looking at her brother. "Oh, come on. Neri-chan already has a good level. It's just a matter of giving him a trump card. And, according to you, which one would it be?" the red-eyed man asked skeptically. "Neri-chan, remember our training. Dirt in one hand and water in the other, then do dog, hare, snake and touch the ground." Strange and curious, he did as he was told. Being able to mold an elemental nature in each hand was not easy. It took him a good 30 seconds to do it. A lifetime in combat. Once accomplished, he did the handstands and touched the ground. The chakra seat and the plants around it began to grow and bloom. It was a beautiful sight. The brown-haired man began to celebrate his success. He had Mokuton too. The white-haired man, after a moment of surprise, turned to his brother with a frown. What the blonde had done was supposed to be impossible. The boy was Uzumaki, not Senju, and it seemed too much of a coincidence that he was a wood element user. Hashirama, you won't have anything to do with this, right? She questioned sternly. The brown-eyed man stopped celebrating and slowly turned to his little brother. Of course not. How can you believe that? He denied, somewhat nervous. He gave him a hard look that told him he didn't believe his lies at all. The brown-haired man stood his ground for a few seconds before starting to squirm a little under the gaze of his little brother. Maybe I have been giving my Ito Tensei cells to Naruto while he was sleeping to increase the chances of awakening the Mokuton, he admitted, extremely nervous, especially when he saw his dear wife's expression. What have you done? What? The normally calm Mito asked with clear anger in her voice. Come on, dear, it's not that big of a deal. Look, Neri-chan is fine and has Mokuton, he tried to justify himself. In the end he had to run to avoid being trapped by his partner's chakra chains. Tobirama could only shake his head at his older brother's stupidity. Without giving more importance to the matter, he focused on his student. His training had to begin as soon as possible. No one seemed to notice Madara's pensive state, which had been kept out of the way from the beginning. They also didn't notice his departure. The former Uchiha patriarch was momentarily forgotten by the rest. Which was fine at the time. He needed to think about a few things. Hours later, as the sun was sinking below the horizon, Naruto returned to the client's house. He was tired but satisfied. He had undergone intensive training while his clone secured the area and searched for information on Geto. The smell of food hit his nose as soon as he walked through the door. She was aware that there was still at least some time before dinner time, but she couldn't help but salivate at the delicious aroma. You're back, he heard a voice to his left. He turned his head slightly and could notice the figure of his Jonin sensei on the living room couch, reading his favorite book. What has kept you so busy that you have been out all afternoon? She asked, taking her eyes off the book and addressing him. I decided to train a little while my clones investigated Geto. I ran out of time a little, she responded, rubbing the back of her neck. Oh, and what have you discovered? He questioned, interested. He may not have been very happy that the blonde was away for so long without warning, but he understood that he didn't do it out of ill will, but rather with a desire to improve. He was also aware that his student used the training as a way to deal with things that bothered her. Nothing good, he answered with a frown. Geto has an army of thugs with which he controls the population. Those who do not pay are forcibly thrown out of their homes, beaten or killed. Out of fear, bullies can do almost anything, and no one will do anything for fear of retaliation. Worst of all, they kidnap young women for fun. His jaw clenched in anger at the last part. The silver-haired man closed his only visible eye tightly. He shared the sentiment of his apprentice. He hated scum like that little man, Geto. Although he was not part of the contract, he wouldn't mind taking down the greedy businessman. He sighed in frustration. First things first. They couldn't let her client die. That was their mission, and the people really needed the bridge to prevent another man like Geto from doing the same thing to them again. Naruto, Zabuza is alive, he warned him. I know. I realized it shortly before I started training, she informed him. The dog summoner nodded. He became more and more delighted with his only student. Just thinking about what would have happened if he had passed Team 7 sent a shiver down his spine. Most likely they were screwed. That is if they were all alive. He shook his head slightly. There was no point in thinking about what ifs. She had done it many times in the past and they never solved anything. They only managed to depress him more. Dinner, Tsunami called. Do you need help going to the table, Kakashi-sensei? No. I may be weak, but I can move a little on my own. Tomorrow we will return to training. Are you sure you're okay for that? The blue-eyed man asked, worried. Don't worry. I'll be fine, he gave his patented eye smile. The Jinchuriki nodded, not very convinced. Kakashi wasn't just his teacher. He was like an older brother to him, just like Iruka-sensei. And even though he was aware that he could handle himself, he was a jonin after all, she still worried about him. The former Anbu captain smiled softly beneath his mask. He could read the boy like an open book at that moment. His concern for him warmed her heart. He felt the family affection and regretted not having entered his life sooner. He allowed himself to relax while they had dinner with Tezuna's family. She didn't even bother with the somewhat emo attitude the boy gave off. He couldn't help but think of the failed Genin he had to test. Sasuke and Inari had a certain resemblance. He shrugged. The Uchiha would be someone else's problem, not his. Naruto, as I told you yesterday, today we return with training. To start, we will have a Taijutsu fight. Are you sure about this, Kakashi-sensei? You don't look very recovered, the blonde asked, worried about his health. The silver-haired man gave him his patented eye smile. He was moved by the concern of his student. Don't worry. It's true that I'm not 100%, but a little training won't hurt. Besides, tomorrow we will accompany Tazuna to protect them while she builds the bridge. It's better to take advantage of the time we have to train, she responded evenly. With some hesitation, the blue-eyed man nodded and got into his taijutsu stance. His style was mainly Tobirama's combat style, but he had added a couple of moves from the styles of the rest of his masters. The black-eyed man wasted no time in attacking his apprentice with a feint punch and kick. The Jinchuriki dodged the first and blocked the second, and then he also attacked with a right hook. While they were having their taijutsu practice, in the forest, an army of 400 Naruto clones were training with the Ito Tensei. Each resurrection had 100 Kage Bunshin to teach. The white-haired man was training them to be able to detect someone in a field fog. Hashirama was teaching them how to use Mokuton along with some jutsus. Mito continued with his instruction in Fuinjutsu, emphasizing barrier seals and some offensive ones. Madara was assisting in his control over the fire. Even if the Suiton beats the Kaiten under normal circumstances, if the techniques had a lot of power behind it, it could evaporate water and even pass through it. At the end of the day, the Uzumaki was exhausted and fell unconscious as soon as he hit the pillow. The following days were a little more enjoyable, although not much. He would get up early, do some training with Kakashi, have breakfast, create several Kage Bunshin to protect the house, go to the bridge with his Jonin sensei, while his clones trained with the resurrected, return in the afternoon, do another training with the former Captain Anbu. I would have dinner and sleep. He was infinitely grateful to whatever deity was in the sky when he saw Zabuza on the bridge that day. The last week had been training hell. Yes, he had gotten much stronger, but the pace was too fast and exhausting even for him. He also wanted to leave as soon as possible, so he wouldn't have to continue putting up with the client's grandson, Inari. If it weren't for all the self-control she had gained since the night of the Forbidden Scroll, she would most likely have exploded at his constant whining. Seriously, she was more annoying than Sasuke, which is saying something. We meet again, Kakashi of the Sharingan, but this time, as you can see, I also have someone with me. Haku, take care of the brat. I take care of Haddock. Yes, Zabuza-sama. Naruto, leave some clones to protect Azuna and take care of Zabuza's sidekick, the dog summoner ordered his student. 2. He created 4 replicas of himself, which surrounded the client and raised a barrier of purple flames. Since when can you make barrier seals? You know what? It doesn't matter. We'll talk about that later. First we must take care of the problem in front of us, the silver-haired man spoke, somewhat defeated. He had been with his apprentice for about a month and a half, and he still continued to surprise him. She always came up with something new that he had no idea he knew about. It was both impressive and infuriating. Without further delay, he launched himself at the swordsman. The Kubikirabacho collided with the blade Jonin's kunai. It wasn't long before the missing ninja used the hidden miss jutsu to gain the advantage. For their part, the Geinin and the false hunter nin also clashed. Initially with taijutsu, and shortly after kunai against kunai. They were quite evenly matched in speed and strength, although the black-haired man was channeling chakra into his arms so as not to lose ground. Your skills are quite amazing, but unfortunately for you I have 2 advantages here. Yes. Which ones? She asked without believing the blue-eyed man. First, we are surrounded by water. And second, you have a busy hand so you can't do jutsus and I can, she replied. He passed through several one-handed seals and sent a shower of senbon needles at his opponent. The Jinchuriki separated from the black-eyed man and performed 5 hand seals at full speed. The water in the environment condensed and formed a wall of water. At times like that and when he was attacked by Sasuke, he was glad that the younger Senju had taught him how to do the water wall technique with reduced seals. Of course, it was easier to do it with a mass of water than with the humidity of the environment, as demonstrated by the fact that the first only needed 3 seals and the second 5, but it was still tremendously practical. Taking advantage of the fact that his enemy couldn't see him, Zabuza's sidekick made several hand positions and launched his most powerful technique. By the time the Uzumaki dropped the jutsu on him, he was already trapped in a mirror dome. Ha, bad luck, Kakashi. Your brat is finished. No one can beat Haku when he uses his ice crystal demonic mirrors technique, the eyebrowless man mocked. We'll see. Naruto is much more capable than he seems, the Yondai student stated with conviction. The Geinin knew he was in a bind. The speed of his opponent had increased enormously and he kept sending senbons at her. Since he created the mirrors, he could only see a blur that he assumed was the original, since his image was in all the glass. He had managed to dodge a good number of them thanks to his reflexes, more than his ability to keep up with her, but he had still received a few as well. Sigh. She hoped she could hide her newfound Mokuton abilities for later, but he didn't think she could afford it in this situation. At that rate, not even her superior regeneration could stop the Senbons from paralyzing her body, if not worse. Oh well, that's what she had been training with Hashirama Ajisan for. He concentrated on shaping his Suiton and Doton chakra while performing the necessary hand seals while trying to dodge as many projectiles as possible, which was not easy at all. He had not yet achieved the necessary level of skill to add natural chakra to his techniques, so they would not be as powerful as the Shodaime Hokage, but it would do for now, or at least he hoped so. As he finished, multiple wooden columns appeared from the ground, blocking most of the mirrors. Without wasting time, he again performed various hand positions while continuing to shape his chakra to mix the earth and water. This time he created several wooden clones. The fight between Zabuza and Kakashi stopped when he saw what was happening. Are you kidding me? Can your student use Mokuton? This must be a fucking joke, cursed the lost ninja. The boy's own sensei was dumbfounded at the new information. Not in his wildest dreams would he have imagined this. He was definitely going to have a very long conversation with his apprentice when everything was over. Shaking his head to clear the shock, he took advantage of his rival's stupefied state to knock him unconscious with a blow to the back of the head. When he looked back at the other fight, he could notice that the ice mirrors were gone and the fake hunter ninja was wrapped in wooden restraints. The fog began to dissolve as it did not receive the chakra necessary to maintain itself. At that moment, the sound of applause began to be heard at the end of the bridge. The image they received seconds later was of Geto with a bunch of thugs behind him. Heh, it seems that Zabuza was not the demon he claimed to be. More like a baby demon, Geto mocked and his men laughed. I have to thank you, Konoha Shinobi, for eliminating him for me. You've saved me the work. In gratitude, I will give you a chance. Hand over the builder and I will let you go alive. Teacher and student looked at each other for a couple of seconds and nodded. Neither of them liked the dwarf, and both were in a position to continue fighting. Not bothering to respond to the corrupt businessman, the leaf ninjas began performing various hand signs. Suiton. Great Water Dragon Naruto named his technique. Raiden. Fang Tracking Lightning Beast Kakashi proclaimed his jutsu. Both attacks merged, turning them into a large electrified water dragon with sparkling eyes. The mercenaries and Geto tried to flee by running in the opposite direction with the intention of jumping into the water. They believed they had a better chance of surviving the fall than the incoming attack. Very few managed to jump and the rest were trapped in the combined technique. No one on that side of the bridge survived. They were all electrocuted to such an extent that their skin was completely red. Tazuna, who was still inside the barrier watching everything, was both relieved and terrified at what he saw. For one thing, Puss was dead, so his country would no longer have to fear the little tyrant. On the other hand, it was chilling how easily the two Konoha shinobi had finished them off. His cries of agony, although short, would be etched in his memory for life. Not even 2 minutes passed before the townspeople appeared at the scene with Inari at the head. She was wearing her usual clothes and hat. The only clear difference was the loaded crossbow she carried in her hands, ready to fire if necessary. Shortly after the shinobi's departure, 2 mercenaries attacked the house with the intention of kidnapping Tsunami. The boy, despite his fear, stood up to the guys to try to save his mother. They would have killed him if it weren't for the interference of the blonde's clones. Even so, they congratulated him for being brave. It was then that he realized that he had to be strong and fight just like Kaiza did. He had gone door to door trying to get people to gather courage and go with him to help his grandfather and put an end to Geto. At first it seemed that he had not been successful, but then everyone came together to confront the corrupt businessman. Each one carrying as a weapon the first thing they had at hand. They felt a little discouraged when they realized that the ninjas had already taken care of him and his thugs, but that was quickly overshadowed by the joy of finally being free. The people returned to their homes to begin preparing a party to celebrate the death of their oppressor. Azuna joined them after the clones maintaining the barrier around them dropped it and dissipated. Kakashi-sensei, what should we do with these two? Asked a blue-eyed man, pointing to the former swordsman of the mist and his accomplice. Don't know. Originally I didn't kill Zabuza to get information about Geto, but now it's not really necessary, she answered honestly. Any ideas? Well, we can always take them to Konoha. I'm sure the T&I department will be able to get some useful information from them. The Uzumaki gave his opinion. It is not a bad idea. Although I'm a little worried about the ice user, the silver-haired man commented. Because? The Jinchuriki questioned confused. There is a faction in the village that will do anything to ensure the power of Konoha. They won't resist the opportunity to have another Kekkei-Genkai in town. They could try to obtain sperm samples from the boy to recreate his identity on the page, the black-eyed man explained. That's horrible. I'm sure Jiji would never allow something like that, the Genin said horrified. That's true. Hokage-sama is too good to do something so unmoral. But he doesn't mean that there will be people who will try to pressure him to accept, the former Anbu captain argued. What should we do? The boy asked worriedly. As I told you before, I don't know. Your idea of taking them to the interrogation division is very valid and good for Zabuza. But it may cause problems with his sidekick, the dog summoner side in conflict. For now, let's enjoy the celebration. Then we'll decide what to do. Naruto nodded in agreement. He needed to distract himself from the dark truth he had just learned. Before sealing the body of the former swordsman, the silver-haired man looked at the sword at his side. It was another thing that they had to decide what to do with her. Nah, I don't know if we should give up the sword, sell it or keep it, the Jonin mused out loud. Sell it. The blonde asked confused. Kubikirabacho is one of the famous 7 swords of the mist. It's worth a fortune on the market, she explained calmly. Do you have financial problems? She questioned a little rhetorically. No. Me neither. So it's not like we need the money, he expressed his opinion. The elder nodded in agreement and sealed the sword in a storage scroll. Even if neither of them ended up using it, it would be a nice reminder of his first mission out of town. He sealed the renegade ninja and his accomplice in a prisoner scroll. That should give him between 1 and 2 weeks before his presence there would bring any ill effects to them. Before they could go with the villagers to celebrate, they had to take care of all the dead bodies on the bridge. Both to avoid all the diseases and unpleasant things caused by the decomposing bodies and so that they would not be a nuisance when the construction of the bridge resumed. It was at that point that the blue-eyed man realized what he had done. He had killed around 100 people. Even if he had done it with the help of his teacher, he had taken the lives of many men. His stomach turned and he began to retch. She ran to the edge of the bridge and emptied the entire contents of his stomach. Her sensei stood next to her and rubbed her back a few seconds after she started vomiting. The Haddock sighed sadly. He had forgotten that his apprentice was only a green genin and this was his first death. It was so easy to forget how little time he had been in the ranks with all the skills he possessed. She waited until he calmed down a bit to talk to him and make sure he was okay. The first death was always the hardest and the Uzumaki had had many to begin with. It wasn't the best at all. They piled up all the bodies on the shore before burning them with 1 Kaiten jutsu each. They cleaned the structure a little with Suiton techniques and then met with the people at the party they had organized. It wasn't very glamorous, but you could tell they had done their best. There wasn't much food, but that was to be expected. Gato had been starving them. It made sense that they couldn't raise more for the celebration. Pretty much there was something to start with. He could notice his client talking to some men he had seen working on the bridge. She was carrying a bottle in her hand and wouldn't be surprised if it was sake. He had already gotten the idea that Tazuna was a hopeless drunk, although he admitted that he had courage. He had originally planned to let the boy enjoy the party for a bit before asking him about his new abilities, especially his Mokuton, but he decided to wait until the next day. Enough that he had to deal with his first death. He deserved some relaxation. Once he was sure that he was enjoying the celebration and was going to be okay, he looked for a secluded place where he could read in peace. He had read almost nothing of his precious Uchiha since she came to Nami. It was time to make up for lost time. He opened his eyes. She looked around her somewhat sleepily and yawned. He had been awake until after midnight. Still, he was one of the first to leave the party. After the children obviously. The celebration had been in style. Sure, there was nothing remotely luxurious and there wasn't much food or drink either, but it was the people that counted. All the people talking, playing and laughing. That's what made her great. His happy smile at the memories of the night turned bitter as he remembered what happened in the morning afternoon. The first death was never easy and he had killed many. He shook his head. He had already talked about it with his sensei the day before and he wasn't going to let it continue to make him bitter. He got out of his sleeping bag and got ready for the day. Her teacher was not in bed, so she must have been downstairs already. Unless she had stayed out all night, which he highly doubted. He went down the stairs with a happy step. Gato was dead and Nami's people were free. The only thing left was to finish building the bridge so that something like this would never happen again. Maybe search the little tyrant's mansion to see what he had there. He walked down the stairs at a light trot and entered the dining room. Everyone was there except the client. He shrugged. She saw him several times that night, always with a bottle in hand. He was probably sleeping completely drunk at that moment. Good morning, he greeted in good humor. Good morning, they returned the greeting. Breakfast was pretty uneventful. Inari did the most talking, telling about the party the day before. The rest added a few things, but let the boy do most of the talking. Naruto, I would like to talk to you. Alone, the silver-haired man told him once they had finished the meal. The blonde just nodded and followed the man. They went upstairs and locked themselves in the guest room. I suppose you want to know about my Mokuton. It was not a question but a statement. Yes, among other things he answered even if it was not necessary. He looked at him questioningly, and the blue-eyed man sighed somewhat tiredly, sensing what the Jonin wanted to know. I didn't tell you because it's recent. I used it for the first time by accident the day we got here. It was the main reason why I was training until late, he answered the unasked question. That doesn't tell me much about why you didn't tell me before, he commented. Kakashi-sensei, be realistic. If I had told you, what would have changed? You are not a Mokuton user. You couldn't have helped me, she protested. He wished he could deny it, but he had to agree with his student on this point. Even if he knew Tenzo, another wood-style user, he really didn't know much about the subject. I grant you that. And I will admit that in this time I could not have helped you. But I know someone who can help you once we return to Konoha. Hey? He asked confused. I have a friend in Anbu who has the Mokuton like you, he answered. I thought that Shadame-sama was the only Mokuton user that existed before me, he said surprised. His story is complicated, he stated, ignoring his apprentice's mistake. Sometimes he kept forgetting the formalities. I'm not the one to tell you his story, but I will talk to him and Hokage-sama to arrange a time so he can help you with your Kekkei-Genkai. Thank you, Kakashi-sensei, he thanked with all his heart. Even if he didn't need it since he had Hashirama Ajisen training him, he appreciated the gesture. Besides that, he was curious about the other person who could use the wood style. There is no reason to give them. I am your sensei and my duty is to make sure you are the best shinobi possible. The dog summoner dismissed now. Would you mind telling me how advanced you are in Fuinjutsu and anything else you know and haven't told me? Of course, he responded a little embarrassed. It wasn't the first time they had a similar conversation. Having 4 secret senseis caused this quite often. She would sometimes notify him that she was learning something so that she wouldn't miss him when she showed it. But most of the time she completely forgot. Although Tobirama had scolded him for it a couple of times, even he recognized that this whole situation was complicated, even more so for a new genin. For that alone he had escaped punishment training and only received a small reprimand. He thanked all the gods because he never had punishment training. From the stories Hiruzen Jiji and Hashirama Ajisen had told him, he was not a pretty thing to see, much less experience. The man could be very sadistic when he wanted to. They spent the next 2 hours talking about the self-taught training he was doing. His chakra detection exercises in a fog imbued with him, his training in Mokuton and Kaiten, and his studies of Fuinjutsu. At the end of the conversation, Kakashi didn't know whether to thank or curse his luck. His apprentice was a damn genius who surpassed both of his parents combined, but gave him more headaches than anything else. He was grateful that his silver hair kept his gray hair from showing, because he was sure that his student was going to give him premature gray hair. Plus there was the fact that she didn't know whether to applaud his initiative or scold him for not informing her of his personal training. It was impressive and he was making leaps and bounds, but it was also annoying not knowing exactly what he could do. How is he supposed to train him properly if he hid his full abilities from him? The only thing keeping him from thinking badly of his actions was the fact that he clearly hadn't told her more out of carelessness than out of bad intentions. He sometimes forgot that not 2 months ago he was considered the class clown. No one would say it after team assignments. He shook his head. It would be best for her mental health not to think about it too much. He would have enough to deal with when they returned to Konoha. Between the ice user and Naruto's awakening of Mokuton, the next council meeting was going to be busy. He wouldn't want to be in the position of Hokage-sama when that time came. He decided to give the blonde the day off to do whatever he wanted and started reading his precious Uchiha. He really needed the distraction of his favorite book to take away the headache he was developing. But Uzumaki, as soon as he was dismissed, left the house to speak with his resurrected senseis, especially with the Senju brothers. He wanted his opinion on what he had just discovered. He never thought that there would be another wood element user and perhaps this would create some problem. This is definitely a problem, the white-haired man stated when the Jinchuriki finished telling what he had discussed with him, the former Anbu captain. It's hard enough to believe that you have learned a couple of Mokuton techniques on your own. If all the hand stamps also match, it will create suspicion. So what should I do? The blue-eyed boy asked, hoping that the red-eyed boy would have some solution. The only thing I can think of is that you perfect the techniques until you can do them with reduced hand stamps. That will eliminate suspicion or at least mitigate it, the Nidaime responded seriously. It won't be easy at all. It took me years to master my Mokuton, and even longer before I could reduce the hand signals of some techniques, the brown-haired man protested with a frown, something unusual for him. We have no other alternative. It is not yet time for us to make ourselves known, and the only credible lie would be that he himself experimented and recreated your jutsus. The only other option to reducing hand seals is to alter the sequence in a way that does not modify the technique. I don't know which of the two is more difficult, the brown-eyed man commented, still frowning. He hadn't taken into account the possibility that there was another person with Mokuton, and now the boy he saw as a son, nephew, grandson could come off badly because of his wish for him to have his Kekkei-Genkai. For now we will use shadow clones. One half will try to use the reduced seal techniques and the other half will try to alter the sequence. The group that shows the most results will be the option we will take, resolve the Suiton user. The second Kami no Shinobi only nodded grimly. This was not a time to be his typical self. Happy-go-lucky. Naruto needed it. He had gotten him into that mess and he would get him out. Naruto was quite nervous, even if it didn't show much. He wasn't stupid. Thanks to his training with the resurrected, especially Tobirama, he had a fairly developed mind for his age, or at least compared to before. He understood the situation perfectly. She knew he would have to work hard to complete the training if he wanted to keep her secret safe. The problem was time. Although the party bought 2 days for people to recover, Gato's death caused more people to work on the bridge, speeding up construction. In less than 2 weeks the bridge will be ready and they will have to return to Konoha. Even with 500 shadow clones working on reducing the hand seals or changing the sequence each, he didn't think he could do much. He needed to find a way to delay the departure. With any luck, the completion of the bridge will earn them another celebration to which they will be invited and delay their return another day, but it was not enough. He had to think of other things to prolong his stay. Bullies. No, very few were saved or did not go to the bridge, and all escaped for fear of being caught or killed. Delay the construction of the bridge in some way. No, none of the ideas that came from there sat well with him. Gato's mansion. That could be an option. The tycoon most likely had many valuable things in his mansion. Giving them to people would be a cause for celebration. He would have another 2 days at least. Yes, I would do that. Of course, I wouldn't do it right away. The day was her day off and she wanted to take advantage of it. Plus he had just finished the celebration and it wouldn't have as much effect. So she would wait at least 3 or 4 days before searching for the mansion. With a dozen cage bunshin, she would most likely be able to find the place in a day or 2, which would be perfect. Just as he thought it, he did it. She waited 3 days before sending his clones to search for Gato's mansion. The next day, shortly after noon, they dissipated to give the original the location of the building. Kakashi-sensei, they found him, Naruto announced after gaining some distance. Very good. We will go after the fight is over, he informed him, to which he nodded. The dissipation of the cage bunshin had occurred in the middle of one of their training matches. Since there was really no risk to their client, they each sent a clone just in case. So far there were no incidents, but it was better to be safe than sorry. The fact that the silver-haired boy knew about the search for Gato's mansion was because the blonde informed him of his intention just before creating his duplicates. The Jonin himself agreed with his idea. They finished their fight a while later, rested for a few minutes, and then went to the mansion. They were curious to know what that place would contain. There was a chance that the few mercenaries and thugs still alive had looted the place, but the scouts hadn't noticed any of that in the little they had looked. It didn't take them even an hour to reach the building. It was huge, and you could tell it was made with the best materials. It had a wall surrounding the mansion with a black grille door with the logo of Gato's company in the center. The gate was unlocked, so they could enter without problems. The garden was in good condition. It had only been about a week since anyone had been there. The door of the mansion, on the other hand, was locked, confirming that no one had entered since the businessman's death. The black-eyed man suggested breaking down the door. It wasn't like his owner could file a complaint. The blue-eyed man shook his head in amusement and used a pair of lockpicks to unlock the lock. "I want to know?" asked a former Anbu captain when he saw his student open the door. The Jinchuriki shrugged and the adult decided to pretend it was nothing out of the ordinary. He inwardly also admitted that it was a good skill for a shinobi. They entered the place and soon both of their eyes widened. You didn't have to be very smart to know that everything there was luxurious. Paintings by famous painters, tapestries of the highest craftsmanship, furniture and carpets of the highest quality, and many other things that we didn't know what they were, but it was clear that they were very expensive. The White Fang's son had been in several houses of people with high purchasing power, but this was ridiculous. He doubted that the daimyo's castle had such ostentatious decoration. Am I wrong to think that there are millions of ryos in decoration alone here? The Genin asked for confirmation. No, Naruto, you are not wrong, his teacher confirmed. Then we should see this, he commented and created several clones to store everything in storage scrolls. Good idea, he congratulated him. With that out of the way, they continued to tour the mansion. Everywhere you looked, there was luxury everywhere, causing the Kyuubi's container to create more cage bunshin, some in order to create more storage scrolls. There was still plenty of good food in the kitchen and pantry. They used a stasis scroll to preserve everything. Later they would deliver it to the town so that they could distribute it among themselves and the rest of the people in the country. The last place they checked was Gato's office. It was as ostentatious as the rest of the house. However, that room had something else that interested them, the documents on the desk and the filing cabinets. Even with the help of the clones, it took them a couple of hours to go through all the papers. To say they were disgusted by the actions of the dead shipping magnate would be an understatement. Smuggling, drugs, kidnappings, extortion, slavery, and forced prostitution were just some of the things the little bastard had handled under the guise of his legal company. The blonde had to contain his retching more than once because of the things he read. Worst of all, their duplicates had found a hidden entrance to a chamber beneath the basement. There was a fairly large group of people chained and locked up. The smell was so strong and nauseating that she dispelled a couple of aftershocks. The memories and experiences hit the original like a ton of bricks. He quickly went to one of the trash cans and vomited up the entire contents of his stomach. "Naruto, are you okay?" The dog summoner asked him worried. "My clones found a secret chamber under the basement. There are many people there. I think almost all of them, if not all, are dead. The smell is unbearable," she informed him once she finished vomiting. The two went down to the basement. The blue-eyed boy was a little pale and weak, but he refused to be left out. If he could do something to rescue those people, or at least give them a proper burial, he would do it. The Jonin was quite worried about his student. What was supposed to be a simple C-rank mission had turned into an A-rank one. To top off his bad luck, the barely teenager had had his first deaths and had been exposed to several of the darkest and nastiest aspects of human greed. He felt quite guilty about that. In times of peace, Gainans were supposed to have time to be children and not worry about the evil of the world. It was his duty as a sensei to safeguard his apprentice. And she had failed miserably. Minato and Kushina must have been disappointed in him. 114. That was the number of people in that basement. And of all of them, only 7 were alive when they were found. 3 men and 4 women. And all of them were in deplorable conditions. Most died from lack of food and liquids, especially the last one. Some due to illness due to the inhumane conditions in which they were. Those images would stay in his head for life. It turned out that all those rescued had family and/or friends alive. The reunion was very emotional and full of tears. He could still hear their watery voices thanking them for saving them. It was something that gave him joy and sadness at the same time. The dead were buried. Those who knew them, although sad, thanked them for at least returning the bodies. At least they would know what became of them. They would no longer see in their dreams the many possibilities of suffering they would be experiencing. The most heartbreaking thing was seeing people who had people they knew who were not among the bodies and those rescued. They would be the ones who would live in hell with all the possibilities of what would be happening to them at that moment. Instead of a celebration like he had expected when he planned to search and loot Puss's mansion, he was met with funerals and a time of mourning. It is true that he still helped him stop the construction of the bridge, but that was not how he wanted it to be. Kakashi had given him the rest of the day off to rest and recover. He hadn't suffered any physical injury, but his mind had really taken a hit. He needed to think and reorganize his ideas. His view of his world had changed. Aburama and Madara had already told him about the evil of the world. The white-haired man told him about how people will do whatever they think benefits them, while the black-haired man explained the cycle of hate in which they were trapped. It was one thing to hear it and another to see it. Hashirama had given him a more positive view of things. He also told her about his dreams of peace. He had been disappointed and saddened when he learned of the shinobi wars that occurred after his death, but he still had hope. Each of them gave him a perspective on all of this. Still, he felt sad and lost. Despite having matured since his time at the academy, he was still a child entering adolescence. He hadn't been even remotely prepared for what he saw on this mission. It's not your fault. You have done the best you could. Nobody can ask you more than that. The blonde turned towards the voice. I know, Mito Abachan, but it still hurts. So many lives lost because of one greedy man. Not just a man, Naruto-kun. Gato was not alone. If it had been like that, none of that would have happened, he corrected her in a calm voice. Could be. But he was the main culprit. Do you think there are more people like him? She asked him with some uncertainty. Unfortunately, there will always be men who put their personal interest over the lives of others. My husband is too optimistic and often ignores the evil of people. I'm not saying everyone is bad, but not everyone is good either. It is inevitable that some people like this will arise. I wish it weren't like that. Why there are people like Gato, I don't understand. He was frustrated. Human greed. The darkness that lives in people. Whether we like it or not, we all have the potential to do good or do evil. It is our own decisions that take us there. So? Why do people decide evil over good? Why do they choose to do harm rather than help each other? She didn't understand it. That's something I can't answer. Every person is a world. But it is generally easier to take the path of evil than the path of good. Not well. It's not correct, the blue-eyed man complained, annoyed. Not everything in this world is fine. Not everything is correct. We can try to eliminate the evil we know, but we will never completely eliminate it. The Jinchuriki sighed. He understood what he meant, but he didn't like him at all. Although he knew it was a childish wish and hope, he couldn't help but want the same thing as Hashirama Ajisan. Peace in the world and may everyone treat each other as brothers. Naruto-kun, she called him, and he looked at her. I know it's difficult for you, but you shouldn't obsess over this. She looked away without answering. You're not alone. I'm here if you need me. We are Uzumaki. We are clan and family. Don't hesitate to talk to me if you need it. He got up and moved with the intention of leaving. Mito Abachan. He stopped but didn't turn around. Yeah. Can you tell me more about our clan? I really want to know, and you don't usually mention them much, he asked in a soft voice. Of course, Naruto-kun. All you had to do was ask for it, he replied with a small smile. He sat down next to him again and told him about his clan and Yuzashii Agakure. They were there for several hours. Until the sun began to set below the horizon. The Genin said goodbye to the Redeed and returned to Tezuna's house. There he had dinner with his family and his sensei. The meal was a leisurely affair. Nobody said anything. The builder's own family was mourning the people they had buried. Later that night, the silver-haired man went to the room and could see his apprentice looking at the ceiling with a distant look. Are you feeling better? She asked him softly. Yes, Kakashi-sensei. I feel better, she replied without looking away from the ceiling. Do you want to talk about it? She questioned cautiously. Needless. I've already come to a resolution on my own. I don't like it, but I know it happens sometimes. The black-eyed man nodded. That was very true. Unfortunately, it was something he had already had to deal with a few times. During his time in Anbu, he had witnessed many unpleasant things, to put it mildly. Good night, the Jonin said. Good evening, returned his student. They both took a while to fall asleep that night, especially the second one. The innocence of a child had been reduced by witnessing the harsh reality. Outside the house, in a clearing in the surrounding forest, the former Uchiha patriarch gazed at the moon. That day had reminded him why he turned traitor and attacked his former friend. The last month had been quiet and he had enjoyed it. He spent time with Hashirama, even if he sometimes got on his nerves. Have cold arguments with Tobirama. Teach a promising boy with great potential. He had allowed himself to forget. She had allowed herself to relax. Stop thinking about the contaminated world she lived in and see only the good. Since that night on the top of Hokage Mountain, after her conversation with the Mokuton user, she had let go of everything from her past. Now everything was coming back again. The darkness that she once saw as clear as day came back again and tainted someone she loved. Although she wouldn't admit it out loud, she had grown fond of Naruto. It was like seeing a younger version of Hashirama. Cheerful, kind-hearted, and with iron determination. However, unlike the brown-haired man, the blonde was more intelligent and sensible. He silently thanked the white-haired man for that. The boy was strong, both physically and mentally. He was confident that he could overcome it despite his young age. He knew he would. The problem was that there was another threat on the horizon that would not harm his psyche, but rather kill him. I was conflicted. On the one hand, the plans that he had developed when he was alive. On the other, the boy he had begun to see as a little brother or nephew. He couldn't choose them both, and that frustrated him. He dreamed of bringing peace to the world just like the elder Senju. Maybe his method was a little questionable. He wouldn't deny it. But he would ensure peace. Hashirama's plan. It was unlikely. He wanted to believe that his old friend was right and Naruto could succeed where they failed. He really wanted to. But his faith in humanity was very low and the Uzumaki would have an uphill battle all the way. He wanted to protect him, but at the same time he wanted his plan to succeed, which would most likely kill him. I would spend the entire night looking at the moon and trying to decide what I should do. Kakashi-sensei. Yes, Naruto. Can I ask you a question? Of course, he gave her his patented one-eyed smile. Do you know why Zabuza became a traitor? The silver-haired man blinked in confusion. He wasn't expecting that question. From what I understand, the fourth Mizukage, Yagura Karatachi, went crazy and started exterminating those with bloodlines. Zabuza attempted a coup d'etat and failed, so he had to flee, he explained. Then it's not so bad. He became a traitor trying to do a good deed, the blonde gave his opinion. The black-eyed man shrugged his shoulders. Maybe yes. Maybe not. In the shinobi world the line between good and evil is quite blurred. For some, what Zabuza did is right and for others it was wrong, he commented philosophically. What I don't understand is why work for someone like Gato, he frowned. Probably for money. Gato was very rich. The life of a lost ninja is not easy. Even less if you want to try a coup again. Do you think he was trying to raise funds to try again? He asked a little surprised. Shrugged. It's a possibility, he replied nonchalantly. Let's find out, he said with a sly smile. The Haddock hesitated a little, but his student managed to convince him in the end. He didn't particularly care about the answer, but if his pupil didn't think about the other day, then he would pretend that he also cared about the answer. He took out the prisoner scroll where he had Zabuza and his sidekick sealed. He released the swordsman from the seal. He didn't need the false hunter nor. The black-haired man was unconscious. He tied him up and the Uzumaki put a chakra suppression seal on him. A low-level water technique did the job of waking him up. The renegade shinobi woke up slightly with a start. He discreetly looked around as he pondered what was happening. First of all, he was tied up. Secondly, he did not have access to his farm. Thirdly, there were no traces of Haku. Fourthly, he had the Konoha shinobi right in front of him. The panorama was not pleasant. Good. All yours, the former Anbu captain patted his apprentice. One of Kiri's former shinobi's eyebrows rose curiously. What would the boy with Mokuton want from him? Okay, she let out a sigh and looked at him sternly, I just have one question for you. Why were you working for Gato? From what Kakashi-sensei has told me, you tried to free your village from the Yondai Mei Mizukage, so I don't understand why you would work for a man like him, a person who enslaves and kills the population. From a country. Boy, you're too young to understand how the world really works. The comment, surprising, was not made with mockery. Believe me, I have seen and experienced many things that most boys my age or a few years older have not felt, he stated with a voice much more mature than he should. He looked at him curiously next to the copy ninja. The Jonin looked with some regret at his student, whose eyes were somewhat clouded. It seemed like the Genin wasn't like other brats who thought they were shinobi just because they had the hit I-8. In this world, it is money that moves you. With it you can buy information, security, health and many other things. However, it cannot bring back the dead. Yugura is killing the people of my country solely for having bloodlines or for supporting those who do. Beto was going to pay me a lot of money to kill the builder. With what he was going to earn, he could obtain supplies for the rebels and thus continue the fight for our freedom. I understand and respect that, but I still don't understand why Gato. He is as bad as Yugura. If not worse. Shrugged. He was the one who offered the job. Plus he planned to kill him after he paid me. I hate guys like him. The Jinchuriki nodded. That was acceptable. Not that he totally agreed with his actions, but he could understand his train of thought. He honestly felt bad for the poor people in the water country who were persecuted and or killed just for being born with a bloodline limit. He didn't see it as fair at all. Plus he couldn't help but think that he was like them. Condemned for something they did not choose. Gato is dead and he planned to kill you after you completed the job. What would you do now if we let you go? Naruto, the dog summoner called in a warning tone. The mist demon laughed. You have balls, boy. I grant it to you. As for your question, go back on the road to look for another job to earn funds. I don't want to return to Kiri empty-handed, he answered sincerely. Naruto. Kakashi-sensei, I know it is against protocol, but I think it is for the best. Think of it this way. We take away the trouble that bringing an ice user to the village could cause, we gain a potential ally in the future if the rebels win the war, which I hope they do, and Zabuza will owe us a life debt. Which is not something one of the 7 Mist Swordsmen can ignore. That was true. There were 2 debts that the members of the 7 Mist Swordsmen could never ignore, a debt of honor and a debt of life. The honor of membership and his sword were at stake in those situations. A debt of honor was when someone saved your honor in some way or returned your sword after someone had taken it. The life debt was when someone saved your life or forgave it in some way, like in that situation. Fine, the silver-haired man finally relented. They took Haku out of the prisoner scroll and gave him Kubikirabacho back. Furthermore, the Mokuton user discreetly passed him a storage scroll. He didn't want his sensei to notice, and luckily he didn't. They said goodbye shortly after, hoping to see each other again once the fog village was free of the tyrant Mizukage. Even with his reservations about the whole matter, the Haddock was proud of the kind heart of his ward. She really was the spitting image of his parents. They returned to the clearing near their client's house and resumed their training. Beneath his mask, the black-eyed man's smile didn't fade one bit for the rest of the day. Beyond Nami, in the country of fire halfway to the border with the country of hot springs, Zabuza and his companion stopped for the night. The swordsman looked at the scroll the blonde had given him. Who would have thought that Agaki would save his life? It was so surreal and downright embarrassing. His only consolation was that he was no ordinary brat. He channeled chakra into the seal and a large cloud of smoke formed. When she cleared up, she revealed a lot of food and some objects that looked really expensive. She quickly realized that those things were previously owned by the dwarf businessman, so they must be worth quite a bit of money. A somewhat psychotic laugh came from his throat. Not only had he saved her life and restored her freedom, but he had also helped her by giving her food and a way to get cash quickly and easily. That boy, he couldn't help but say out loud as he shook his head. He gave a small chuckle, in disbelief. It seemed that not only did he owe her a life debt, but he also owed her one for helping his cause. She hoped to see him again in the future and pay her debts. Hand in hand, if the rebels won and he was alive at the end of the war, he would make sure that Kiri and Konoha had an alliance. That boy had a great future ahead of him, he could say that for sure. It was better to have him as an ally than as an enemy. Naruto let out a sad sigh. The bridge was finished and they would depart back to Konoha the next day. The only reason they weren't already on their way was because he and the villagers managed to convince Kakashi to stay for the celebration. He wasn't sure where his sensei was, but he figured he was reading that perverted book of his. Well, he was missing it. The party was very lively and, unlike the other time, there was more food and things to enjoy. Both the blonde and the silver-haired had been named heroes of the wave. So much so that the bridge was named in his honor, the Great Bridge of Naruto and Kakashi. Both shinobi blushed with embarrassment for the honor, although the black-eyed man didn't notice it thanks to the mask. It was shortly after that I had lost track of him. Maybe she didn't like being the center of attention. The blue-eyed man couldn't help but feel a little melancholy at that moment. He would miss Nami. He had grown very fond of the land and the people of it, especially Tezuna's family. Inari had overcome his fear of him and was determined to be as strong as Kaiza Tausen and Naruto Nyasen. The Mokuton training went surprisingly well and he was done, for the time being. He had managed to reduce hand seals for some techniques. Tampering with the hand seals was much more difficult, so he ruled it out in favor of the other option. Since he only showed 2 wood element jutsus, which he had already reduced the hand seal sequence, he didn't think he would have any problems when it came to showing off his skills. The other techniques were just in case. The former Anbu captain had been arguing more often with his apprentice about what he was practicing on his own. Although he was happy that he was a genius like his father, he was downright perplexed by his learning speed. From the beginning he knew that teaching his sensei's son would have its ups and downs. However, he never thought about all the headaches that his unnatural advances would cause her. The seemingly out-of-nowhere activation of the Shodaime Hokage's bloodline didn't help. For some strange reason, he had the feeling that all this was his divine punishment for his years of tardiness and reluctance. Worst of all, she could imagine Obito on the other side laughing at him for his troubles. At that moment he was on a tree branch reading Icha Icha. Although he was reluctant to stay for the celebration, he appreciated the extra time. He probably wouldn't have much free time on the sheet anytime soon. He was already imagining the council meetings and was grateful that he wasn't the Hokage. Besides, his student deserved a break. They had been training almost constantly since they came to the wave. Not to mention his training aside. If you add to that the rescued people, it was obvious that the boy must have been exhausted both physically and mentally. Then there was the matter of Zabuza. She understood the blonde's reasoning, but she still didn't like him at all. The biggest problem would be how to explain it to his leader so that he wouldn't get into trouble, which was a possibility even if they both had a grandson-grandfather relationship. He stopped thinking about it and focused on his book. Where was she? Yes, Torin found Miyoko fresh out of the shower with only a towel, haha. What the Jonin did not realize was that Hashirama was a few branches above watching him, or rather his book, until his wife grabbed him by the ear and pulled him out of there. The man turned as he heard the rustling of branches and leaves moving. He surveyed his surroundings for a couple of minutes before shrugging and continuing to read him. His time in Anbu made him somewhat paranoid. It was clear that there was nothing there and it was just his imagination. A few hundred meters away, Mito was scolding her husband for being so reckless. It was not necessary to spy on the copy nin, especially not so closely. She could have found out. Luckily for him, the Uzumaki had not noticed his reading. Tobirama could only shake his head at his brother's idiocy. He had his suspicions about what he was really doing, but he decided to keep quiet to avoid trouble. He sighed with a bit of exasperation. She had already come to the conclusion a long time ago that his brother was incorrigible. Luckily for everyone, or at least for him, she was able to teach the summoner restraint from him. At first he was too similar to the older Senju. A shiver ran through him as he thought what would have happened if he had followed that path. The world had enough with one Hashirama. 2 would be disastrous. His mind wandered to the Uchiha. Madara had been somewhat distant since the day Naruto and his official sensei went to Gato's mansion. Who would have thought that he would be the most affected in the matter? Do not get wrong. She knew that the black-haired man had already seen things like that and it didn't bother him. He also had no illusions that he had suddenly become a good person. He wasn't sure what was going on in his head, but he felt like something had changed. He decided not to dwell on the matter any further and focus on the next challenge ahead of them. Time was running out and they would soon return to Konoha. She was confident that his latest student could handle all the suspicions his new ability with the Mokuton had created, but it never hurt to have backup plans. The hours passed and it was time to leave. The people of the town where Tezuna's family lived and other people from the country gathered at the end of the bridge, saying goodbye to their heroes. They had done great things for them and they would never forget them. Nyasen, do you have to go now, can't you stay a little longer? Inari asked, clinging to the Uzumaki. I'm sorry, Inari, but I have to go back. We really have been here longer than our share of time. But don't worry, I will visit them again. It is a promise. Take care of yourself. And don't forget that you have a house here if you need it. The same for you, Kakashi-san, the builder told them. The silver-haired man nodded gratefully. His departure was accompanied with many goodbyes, good luck, come back soon and many other farewells. The Jinchuriki felt like a celebrity at that moment. It's not that she disliked him. Quite the opposite. He loved being recognized by the people of Nami. He felt that he was one step closer to achieving his dream. The Haddock smiled with joy, which could only be seen in his one uncovered eye. He was happy for both the inhabitants of the country and his apprentice. The Genin deserved all the recognition and happiness he could get, even if it drove him crazy sometimes. The return journey was quite calm. They didn't have any confrontations, and they spent their time having a pleasant conversation. Because they did not have any civilians with them, they were able to move much faster and shorten the travel time. 3 days after leaving the wave, more than 3 weeks after starting the mission, they were able to see the walls of their village again. The black-eyed man didn't think he would be so happy to see them. Despite knowing all the headache that awaited him upon his return, it was good to be home. Naruto and Kakashi quickly checked in at the door and headed to the Hokage's office to report. Normally, after a mission, a written report is made and delivered along with a signed paper showing the completion of said mission. When it is a mission for the village, a signature is not necessary as the Hokage will add it later. This procedure has 3 exceptions. D ranks, some high importance quests, and misclassified quests or with items not counted or of relevance to the village. The first does not need any report and the others are done through an oral report. If necessary, one is written later, but an oral one is done manually. Since their C-rank mission was misclassified and had items relevant to the village, it obviously fell into the 3rd category twice, so they had to report directly to the Hokage. Sorry. We need to talk to the Hokage. Procedure M20 and K48, the silver-haired man said to the secretary, who quickly spoke over the intercom. The Hokage is waiting for you, he warned them and allowed them to pass. Procedure M20 was code for announcing a misclassified C-rank mission that resulted in an A rank. On the other hand, Procedure K48 meant that they had important information regarding a Konoha clan, but not one that put that clan at risk. Jonin Haddock, Uzumaki Genin, it's good to see you both in good condition. Now, I can understand the M20 procedure, but I'm curious about the K48. However, I'll let you tell it in order. Report, he ordered seriously. For the next hour and a half, the former Anbu captain told his military leader everything that occurred on his mission, with a few input here and there from his student. He listened to everything carefully. He had had some suspicions about Tazuna, hence he offered backup for the mission, but he didn't imagine there would be so much behind it. He was in shock when he was informed that the young man had awakened the Shadame bloodline. Even more incredible, he managed to recreate a couple of his techniques in a week. He would have to contact Tenzo to test him and teach him how to use the wood element correctly. Plus he was curious to see what he could do. Would he be as good as his sensei's brother, as good as Tenzo, or somewhere in between? He was a little worried when he learned about the boy's first murders. Usually the first murder is the hardest, and the fact that there were several didn't help. The only thing that calmed him a little was seeing that he had coped more or less well. He grimaced slightly as he learned of all the small businessman's dirty dealings. He had had his suspicions about the Gato company, but he had seen no real reason to investigate. As one would expect, the Sundaime was quite surprised and very serious at the end. I have mixed feelings about your actions with Zabuza. He looked at them both, although he focused more on his grandson figure. However, I understand your reasoning, and I cannot deny that there is a high possibility that they will be beneficial in the long term. He made a pause. On the other hand, the awakening of a Mokuton user is simply amazing. I will have to schedule a council meeting later to discuss this. Until then, you're fired. Take a break and relax. They have earned it. Hi, they both stated and left the office. Once he was alone, Hiruzen dropped into his chair and let out a sigh. I'm too old for this shit, he complained, much to the amusement of the Anbu who were hiding in the office. Outside the Hokage tower, the dog summoner dismissed his apprentice and went home. He was going to take advantage of all the time he had before the council meeting to relax. He didn't know when he would have a chance after that. The blonde, for his part, headed to teammates' training camp. He had been thinking about it a lot and, with Mito's advice and encouragement, he had decided to ask Hinata on a date. Was nice. Shy and a little strange, but nice. He knew she liked him, which was a start. According to her aunt, it was better to date the person who liked you than the one you liked. I didn't quite understand what he meant, but I might as well give it a try. If it went well, the two of them could go out more and maybe be dating. If it went wrong, well, they could always be friends. He arrived at the training ground to see Kiba and Shino in combat while being watched by his sensei and his teammate. Hello Hinata-chan, the blue-eyed boy greeted in a good mood. The aforementioned turned when she heard him and turned red when she saw him. Hello, Naruto-kun, he returned the greeting while joining his fingers in a clear nervous tick. The red-eyed girl couldn't help but have a small amused smile when she saw their interaction. Hello Naruto-san. Can I ask what are you doing here? Oh yeah. I'm sorry Kurenai-san. I came to talk to Hinata-chan about something. If I can, of course, she responded somewhat nervously. She nodded and looked at her student. The pearl-eyed girl played with her fingers for a moment until she gathered enough courage to speak. What do you need? She asked softly and trying not to stutter. Well. He was asking me if you wanted to go on a date with me tonight. If you're not busy, of course. The Gainin's brain stopped working for a few seconds. Naruto, her crush, was asking her out on a date. Yes, she squealed excitedly before falling unconscious. The Jinchuriki looked at her worried about her fainting. Alright. He asked worried. Yes, that's fine. She'll wake up in a while, the Jonin assured him. Oh, good, she sighed in relief. Could you tell her when she wakes up that I will pick her up here at 8, please? I don't want to pick her up at her compound to avoid problems with her clan. I'm not sure of her opinion of me, and I don't want to risk it. Don't worry. I inform you, she smiled kindly. Thank you. With that she said goodbye and went to a secluded place. She needed to talk to her and figure about advice for her date that night. Maybe later he would go to Ichiraku to talk to AM for a second opinion. He didn't want to look bad on her first date. Oh, what a beautiful dream. She couldn't help but think out loud to the Hyuga when she woke up. What dream? The Genjutsu master asked with an amused look. One that I have had. Naruto-kun appeared and asked me for a date, she replied dreamily. It wasn't a dream. That happened about 5 minutes ago, more or less. That completely woke up the young heiress. She looked at her sensei, who was smiling very amused. Her brain went a mile a minute trying to accept that her crush had actually asked her out on a date. A great feeling of happiness overwhelmed her and she fainted again with a huge smile on her face. The older Kunoichi shook her head, still amused. She hadn't even had a chance to tell him what time her appointment was and she had already passed out again. Just then the male members of the team had finished and addressed them. Kurenai-sensei, what happened to Hinata? Asked the Inyazuka when he saw the girl fainted. Aburam asked himself the same question. Oh, it's nothing. She will be awake shortly. For now, she take a break. When she wakes up we will go for a deer rank. The brown-haired man groaned. He couldn't wait to do more difficult missions. The black-haired man only adjusted his glasses. He didn't like doing such missions either, but unlike his louder companion, he refrained from making any comments about it. Naruto went to the council meeting room with a big smile. The last few days had been very good in his opinion and he was in a very good mood. Hinata was great company when you managed to get her out of her shell. Their first date was a picnic in a flower-covered clearing he had found. She would have preferred to take her to a restaurant but she didn't want to risk something ending badly. In the end she made the right decision. The second was a meal at Ichiraku. She didn't seem to mind going to the little ramen stand and they had a good time. It would have been perfect if it weren't for AM telling the pearl-eyed girl embarrassing things about him. She at least enjoyed hearing her beautiful laugh. The third date, and the last one they had had, was at their apartment. He bought the ingredients from the shops under a henge and prepared a dinner for the two of them. It wasn't a 5-star meal, but it tasted good and the Hyuga appreciated the gesture. Naruto, are you ready for this? His sensei asked him. As much as I can be, he replied, dimming his smile. He nodded and opened the doors. On the other side the council was already assembled. The council had 4 parts. Civilians, clan heads, elders and the Hokage himself. I could tell there were 4 empty seats. He quickly identified them as the seats for Senju, Uchiha, Sarutobi and Kurama. The Senju and Uchiha were obvious given the circumstances. The Sarutobi was normal because Hiruzen was Hokage and, therefore, could not serve as the head of the clan. The Kurama, however, was more complicated. From what he had heard, there were many tensions in said clan because many did not consider her heir suitable and supported her uncle. Until the dispute was settled, they would not be able to vote on the council. Very good. Now that we're all here, we can begin, the Sundaime began. Hokage-sama, what are those two doing here? Asked a civilian. It is about them that the meeting is held, or more precisely what happened on their last mission. And what happened, Hokage-sama? Shikaku asked lazily. He was enjoying a well-deserved rest when he was informed of this meeting. And the worst thing was that when he finished and returned home his wife would be waiting for him to return to work. I let Kakashi answer that. Kakashi, please. Of course, Hokage-sama. Thus he began to tell what had happened in broad strokes and focusing on what was most relevant. It should be said that all those who were not aware were very surprised by what was narrated. Danzo, although he didn't let it show, was furious with his old friend for not letting him train the boy. Jinchuriki, Mokuton and natural talent, with that mix he could have put all nations at his feet. Hokage-sama, I think I speak for everyone when I say that it is obvious that Naruto-san is a senju. Furthermore, he must also be a descendant of the Shodaime. So he is the rightful heir of his clan since Tsunade-sama hasn't set foot in the village in almost 20 years, Inoichi said. I agree. Plus it would be nice to have a senju to show off. The rest of the countries know about Lady Tsunade and believe that she is the last of her clan and therefore the senju will finish off her. It would be good for us to prove that that is false and that the senju can actually return, Hiashi argued. Little by little everyone in the room agreed with very few exceptions. Although several civilians reluctantly agreed that it was for the best, others flatly refused as they did not want the demon brat to have political power. A vote was taken and the majority voted in favor. Well, it's a fact. Naruto-kun, from now on you are the senju heir. You will be able to take the position of clan leader and be part of the council when you become Chunin or are 18 years old, his grandfather figure informed him. Can I keep my last name? I'm used to being Uzumaki. Besides, if I am descended from the Shodaime, then I am also descended from his wife and she was in Uzumaki, the bluey man asked. I don't see any problem. From now on you will be Naruto Uzumaki Senju, the Sundaime announced with a smile. With that said, the meeting ended and people left. Some were happy, some were serious, and some were upset. Hiruzen was particularly happy that everything had turned out so well for his grandson figure. Being a clan heir granted him certain privileges and protections that would ensure his safety. Although he kept wondering where his Mokuton came from. Did Kushina have some senju blood or was it on Minato's side? Hiashi, although stoic on the outside, was smiling on the inside. He knew that his eldest daughter was dating the copy nin's apprentice. He hadn't made any moves for or against because he wanted to gather as much information as possible about the boy to make the best decision. At that moment, with the new events, their relationship was the best thing that could have happened. He was to meet with the elders as soon as possible and make his move. The news that the resident Jinchuriki was now the heir to the Senju clan spread like wildfire. The general shinobi population ranged from neutral to delighted with the news. Knowing that one of their founding clans was still alive was good news. The reaction of the civilian population was much more varied. There were people who saw it as an opportunity to increase their power within the village. Others feared the repercussions of his past mistreatment. Others flatly refused to accept that fact and continued to see him as the demon brat. And civilians had many more reactions to the news. For his part, the object of the gossip was his Jonin sensei, who had taken them to his training camp to talk. Naruto, Hokage-sama and I have been talking about your training and we have reached an agreement. Starting tomorrow, you will train with me in the mornings, we will do 1 or 2 missions, and in the afternoon you will train with Tenzo, the person I told you about who possesses Mokuton. Kakashi-sensei, can I ask you a couple of questions? Of course, he responded with his patented eye smile. If Tenzo has the Mokuton, then isn't he a senju too? And if so, why isn't he the heir? It's complicated. The silver-haired man searched carefully for the words. He does not have senju blood and did not obtain the Mokuton naturally. He was the victim of an illegal experiment that gave him his Kekkei-Genkai. He explained the situation as vaguely as possible. The blonde realized he was being vague on purpose. However, he did not give it much importance. His questions were answered. He was curious about the whole thing, but he decided not to pry. Later, if that's what he would ask the Tenzo. The rest of the conversation was about what the Haddock had planned to show him in the coming months. With his current level he was already very prepared for the Chunin exams that would occur in Konoha, but it was better to be safe than sorry. Normally, the Gainins entered the exam in teams of 3, but not always. There were times when the trainees entered the exams alone. It was not very common because it would be them alone against the rest. Even rarer were teams of 2. That usually only happened when a village was low on talented Gainins and still wanted to compete to advertise and attract clientele. So yes, Kakashi was going to train his student to be strong enough to enter the exam and not only survive, but wipe out everyone. He would be lying if he said he was only doing it for the good of the people. He really wanted to show off his student and show everyone that his sensei's son was a prodigy like his father. Naruto waited patiently for his new master. He had trained with Kakashi-sensei that morning and they had finished their second D rank 15 minutes ago, so the silver-haired man had retired and he had returned to the training field as indicated. He was curious what the other wood element user would be like, both physically and in attitude. He couldn't help but wonder if he looked like Hashirama Ajusen or his brother. Would he be brown-haired or white-haired? Brown-eyed or red-eyed? Happy or serious? Maybe none of that. He didn't have to wait much longer when a man appeared on the scene. He had short almond-shaped brown hair. The big black eyes. He was wearing a variation of the typical clothing of a Konoha ninja with his bulletproof vest. The biggest difference between his attire and the norm was that the collar of the shirt was tight-fitting and reached to the chin. He also had 2 hip pouches strapped to his back instead of just one. On top of that, he had a Hapuri-style forehead protector that framed his face. He reminded her quite a bit of Tobirama in that regard. You must be Tenzo. Pleased to meet you. I am Naruto Uzumaki Senju. I hope I can learn a lot from you, she greeted him cordially and made a small bow at the end. Yes, I am Tenzo, and it is a pleasure to meet you Naruto-san. My senpai has told me a lot about you. Your senpai. Your sensei, Kakashi, is my senpai, he explained. Oh, he nodded. Very good. With that out of the way, I'd like to know what you can do with your Mokuton. I'll teach you from there. Well, I only know 4 techniques. Mokuton. Wooden clone, Mokuton. Wooden pillars, Mokuton. Wooden wall block and Mokuton. Wooden dragon. That's pretty good for being self-taught. Now, show me the hand seals. I want to know if they are the same ones I use or different. Then I want you to do them to see both your proficiency and the power of your jutsus. The blonde did as he was told. He first reviewed the hand seals for his new sensei to see. Then he performed the techniques to the best of his ability. The brown-haired man noticed that the sequence was similar to his, only with 1 or 2 less hand seals, except for the wooden dragon, which was missing 3. The power of the jutsus were stronger than his. Not to the level of the Shodaime, but not too far. Which was surprising. It seemed like he had some proficiency with the techniques, but had some work left. Not much, but something. In addition to experience using it, of course. That was very good. You need to keep practicing with them to fully master them, but they are certainly suitable for combat, especially Moku Bunshin. It seems like you have it completely mastered. Thank you. Wood cloning is my favorite technique. It's like the Cage Bunshin, but without the limitation of being dispelled by one hit. It is certainly a very useful technique, he nodded. I have also realized that each technique is of a type. Attack, defense, support and complementary. Balancing your skills, which, from my point of view, is ideal. But that in mind, I am going to teach you one of each type of technique, starting with the Mokuton variant. Wooden pillars, Mokuton. Pillar prison. Then I'll show you another one that I think you like. With those words, the training began. It turned out that the other jutsu was Mokuton. House of the 4 pillars. From what he explained, this technique was used by sending chakra into the soil, where the roots of plants become raw materials. This technique allowed a building to be constructed in an accelerated manner. As with Mokuton. 4-pillar prison, the size and shape of the building varies depending on the user's imagination. By placing someone around the house, the user creates a barrier, making it impossible to detect and allowing the user to rest in peace. He wasn't wrong when he said he was going to like it. Being the first day, they finished at 6 p.m. Tenzo warned him before leaving that starting the next day they would be there until 7. The blue-eyed man had no problem with that. Yes, he would take away time with his resurrected senseis or with Hinata-chan, but he could send clones with the former, and he was sure that the latter would understand and could even send her a Cage Bunshin to pass the time. Thinking about the Pearl Eye, he decided to go see her and spend time with her. He would also take the opportunity to chat a little with Kiba and Shino and see how they were doing. From what he had been told previously, they finished training between 6:15 and 6:30, depending on what they were doing. They rarely called it a day first if they did everything they had planned before their normal leaving time. Since he had time, he decided to take the long way to training ground 8. Usually he would cross the forest or take the path next to it, since they were the quickest routes and there were usually no people, but this time he decided against it. The long way was to return to the town proper and then head towards training ground 8. Normally I wouldn't take this route to avoid the town. Although the glances and whispers had toned down since he became a shinobi, he had always preferred to avoid them altogether. On that occasion he wanted to check the looks and the whispers, so he had no choice. It had been more than a day since the council recognized him as the heir of the Senju clan. During the missions he had done that day, he had been able to notice the looks and whispers, which had been very varied. He could also tell that his sensei's presence affected the population a bit. In a positive or negative way. He couldn't say for sure, but he certainly made them more cautious about it. That was why he was walking through the town alone. He wanted to analyze his environment without factors that could alter the results. Hand in hand, a lot more people were looking at him and there were a lot more whispers. Channeling chakra into his ears, he heard fragments of the conversations. Some were happy that the Senju clan was back. Others were afraid that he would use his newfound political power to take revenge on those who wronged him. Others continued to hate him and accuse him of being the reincarnated Kyuubi, even if they didn't use those words themselves. The strange thing was some things he heard some girls say. She reminded him eerily of Uchiha fangirls. He made a mental note to be vigilant in the future. He had seen Sasuke run away from hordes of his fangirls in the past, and it wasn't exactly because he was antisocial, which he was, but that was beside the point. Having seen and heard what he wanted, he quickened his pace towards training ground 8. There was no need to risk anything bad happening. "There it is," he heard a girl shout behind him. He turned around and saw a group of girls running towards him. That was precisely what he wanted to avoid. Molding chakra quickly, he made a shunshin to get away from there. He didn't want to have anything to do with them. The group was shocked when their target disappeared. They looked everywhere, looking for him. Not seeing him, they set out to find him again. The Naruto Uzumaki Senju fan club had been formally started and they were on their first hunt for him. While the original Naruto was in his second lesson with Tenzo, a small group of shadow clones were with the Senju brothers and Mito. Madara had disappeared shortly after they returned to Konoha. The Redeed had taken a couple of clones to give them some lessons about Uzushiogakure and the Uzumaki. She had already told him a little about it while they were in Nami, but she thought it was right to continue and tell him all about the history and customs of her ancestors. Hashirama had taken the largest number of Kage Bunshin to help them in their Mokuton training. Even if there was another wood element user alive and teaching him, the brown-haired man considered it his obligation to teach him everything he knew, since he was the one who gave him his lineage. In addition to that, he would thus have to compare techniques and ways of learning. Tobirama, like Mito, had two clones. One she was teaching some of his Suiton jutsus, and another she was teaching the history and customs of his clan. It was about 550 years ago that a group of Senju who were naturally born with larger chakra reserves than the rest and most with red hair asked permission from Gasuke Senju, the leader at that time of the clan, to form their own clan. Gasuke accepted his request with several conditions. The most important were: never turn against the Senju, maintain contact and relationships with their original clan, and help the Senju when they asked and could afford it. The terms were accepted and the clan split into two, the Senju and the Uzumaki. Mito will probably tell you more about this from his side. So I will skip it and continue only with the story of the Senju, the white-haired man informed the Kage Bunshin. Don't worry. Mito Abichin has already told me this part. It was the first thing he told me about the history of our clan, commented the blonde. That's good, but you still have to know the part that involves the Senju. Or has he told you that part too? If he did. Many people within the Senju clan questioned Gasuke's decision because they felt he was weakening the clan. The clan war was still raging and the Uchiha had them in their sights. A reduction in their numbers at that time would only make them an easy target both for the Uchiha and other clans. That's right. Gasuke's decision created a lot of friction in what was left of the Senju clan. However, Gasuke wasn't the leader for nothing. He was well aware of the risks of his decision. It was during his rule that the Senju were truly recognized as the clan of 1,000 trees. Although our clan always preferred to live in the forests and use our environment to our advantage, Gasuke took it to another level. Gasuke is considered the first Mokuton user in history. Wait. I thought Hashirama Ajusen had been the first, he protested, incredulous. As you know the Mokuton, yes. You could say that my brother was the first, but there were others who controlled the wood. Although not at my brother's level. What do you mean? He asked, confused. Gasuke could manipulate nature, but not like you or my brother. He could grow trees to adulthood, manipulate their branches or roots so that they attack enemies, make them stay green despite being deciduous trees, and it was winter, grow vines and grasses to restrain adversaries. In essence, he could alter what already existed to a certain extent. You and my brother can create it from nothing and alter it in many more ways than Gasuke or any other Mokuton user before you could. Oh. She exclaimed in amazement. Yeah. For someone who lives in the forest, this ability gave him a great advantage. It was thanks to that he was able to keep the clan safe until they were back to proper numbers. Much to his dismay, the red-eyed man paused after that. Although he tried to present himself as the epitome of the perfect shinobi, logical and with his emotions in check, sometimes it was difficult to be. It pained him to remember that his once great clan had been reduced to almost nothing. The only person with Senju blood still alive in the world was her great niece, who was a disgrace in her eyes. He looked at the young man in front of him. She knew it was just a duplicate of the original, but that didn't matter. Naruto, although he was not a true Senju, could be the last hope of his clan. He bore his last name and his brother's bloodline. Not to mention that he was in Uzumaki, his cousin's clan. He harbored without knowing it, or perhaps he did know it, the only possibility for the Senju to be reborn. Tsunade was already too old, and it was highly unlikely that he would have any offspring. No. The blonde was his only chance. Within what was possible. She had been lucky. The boy was young and he had been able to educate and teach him so that he would be someone suitable for the standards of his clan. He had his moments where he acted more like Hashirama and it would get on his nerves or exasperate him, but overall he was fine. Putting those thoughts aside, he continued with the history lesson. The blue-eyed man had been named by the council and the Hokage the new Senju heir. He would make sure that he was equal to his position. Also a small voice in his head spoke the plan to turn him into our mini-me is still in effect. Deciding to ignore said voice for the moment, he returned with what he was. At least, that was the plan before hearing the explosion. He let out a tired, exasperated sigh. From the direction of the noise and the slight smoke she could see. Her brother had done something idiotic again. Although he was curious as to how something could explode when he was supposed to be teaching the clones how to wield the Mokuton. At the site of the explosion, a crater in the ground several meters wide and a few meters deep could be seen. Both Hashirama and the clones looked at the hole in surprise, bewilderment, or a mix of the two. This has not happened. If anyone asks, we were further away and we don't know what happened here, the brown-haired man indicated to the cage buncheon. The replicas continued to look at the result of the explosion in amazement. Too late, dear, a sickeningly sweet voice told the brown-eyed man. The Shadame stiffened and slowly turned his head to see his lovely wife, with a tremendously sweet expression that told him he was in hell of trouble. Like any sane man, he did the smartest thing to do in that situation, run. Thus the husband flees from his loving and terrifying wife. The duplicates, still in their places around the crater, are slowly coming out of their stupor. Hey, did anyone notice the way Ajasan did this? Asked one. The blondes looked at each other and shook their heads. Joe. She would have been great. We have to ask him after Abachan beats him up. Everyone nodded and said their own agreement. A noise close, but not close enough to worry about being seen, alerted them. Everyone, dissipate, one of the blue-eyed men ordered, and they all did so without hesitation. If they had bothered to know who it was, they would have seen that it was Tobirama, and there was no need to dissipate. Although his eyebrow twitching might have convinced them to do it anyway. At Training Ground 7, the original Naruto received his clone's memories with slight confusion. That few seconds' lack of concentration was all he needed for the jutsu he was doing to go wrong and explode into hundreds of splinters. Okay. I didn't expect that, Tenzo commented when he saw the result of his part-time student's latest technique. I'm sorry. A shadow clone dispersed and my memories of him distracted me, he informed her, a little embarrassed. We will have to work on that. Losing concentration in the middle of battle could mean the death of you and your comrades. Tomorrow we will train so that you can fight and create your techniques without the memories of your clones dissipating getting in the way. For now, let's try to replicate this result. A shower of splinters like this could be a good wide area attack. Hi sensei, he nodded and got to work. The rest of the afternoon consisted of consciously reproducing his mistake. Once he was able to do it, he taught it to the brunette so he could do it too. At 7 o'clock he left the training field at a fast pace heading to his apartment. He had arranged to meet Hinata in an hour and wanted to be presentable before meeting her. Since he was announced as the Senju heir, no store or restaurant had refused him service or inflated prices. The consequences for doing so deterred anyone who still had a lingering grudge against him. Thanks to that he could take the pearl-eyed girl on a date like Kami wanted. His idea was to officially ask her to be his girlfriend at the end of the evening. She already had Hiyashi's approval to date her daughter, which was surprisingly easy. He didn't know, and didn't need to know, that the Hyuga patriarch had been looking forward to said request from the blonde. It wasn't very difficult for the clan head to convince the elders that a relationship between Hinata and Naruto would be good. And here I will wrap up this story. If you want the next part of this video, turn on the notification bell to receive the video first. See you all in my next video.